Hey, Jack. 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 Can everybody hear me? As I'm not hearing anybody.
Mr. Cassiano, we can hear you just fine. You're going to start within 3 minutes.
Okay, I can hear you now. Thanks.
Good evening and welcome to the Wednesday, April 7th workshop meeting in Northwestern Lehigh School District. Would you please open the meeting with me with the opening exercises? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. Mrs. Eisenhardt, for the first time in your new role, will you please call the roll?
John Cassiano,
Here.
Willard Delacour,
Here.
Joseph Fattinger,
Here.
Todd Hernandez,
Here.
Todd Weiser,
Lizer. Here.
sorry, Rosemary Lister, here, Alan Rex,
Here.
Rachel Scheffler,
Here.
James Warfel.
Here.
Thank you, everyone present this evening, and welcome aboard, Stacy, as the new secretary for the board and administrative assistant. And we have two changes, two additions to the agenda before we approve the agenda that I would like to bring to your attention. We are adding 2.02 to discuss summer camps, to take advantage of some grant money that came from the government for us to use. And also under new business, we will be discussing the ballot for the L-Tri-C trustee at large position. So with that, I would ask approval of the agenda for this evening.
Motion to approve the agenda?
Motion by Mr. Ricks,
Second.
second by Mr. Lizer. Any comments or questions? Hearing none, all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. And we have an agenda. And once again, welcome to everyone who is with us this evening. And at this time, we will offer courtesy of the floor to anyone who would like to address the board. In doing so, please raise your hand on Zoom to be brought into the meeting, and begin by stating your name and your address. Dr. Sosnowick, do we have anybody waiting?
Not at this time.
Not at this time, okay. There will be another opportunity.
Oh, I backtracked.
Okay,
Spoke too early. We have one.
okay.
Wait a second. It's telling me that Mrs. Height is using an older version of Zoom. So I will have to promote her as a panelist to allow her to talk, at which point I'll have to make her back an attendee. So this is going to be a little bit of a process. Give me 1 second, okay?
Okay, so we do have one person who'd like to address the board, and we're trying to
Yes.
overcome the technical difficulties at this time.
No. Mrs. Height, you should be able to unmute yourself at this point. Mrs. Height, just in case you can't hear me before, you could unmute yourself and address the board. It doesn't look like she has her microphone configured. I'm going to move her back to an attendee for now. And then I'm going to allow the next person to talk, okay? Mrs. Snyder, Lacey Snyder.
Mrs. Snyder, you may please come in and address the board, courtesy of the floor.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, awesome. I'd like to just start by introducing myself. Again, for some of the new board members who might not know who I am, I did email you all last evening. My name's Lacey Snyder, and I am a parent of 3 children living within our school district. And I wanted to start out by truthfully thanking the staff, the board, and administration for all of the efforts throughout this past year. As an educator myself, I know firsthand what it's been like in the trenches, so to speak, as both a teacher and a parent, and your continued work is very much appreciated. Tonight, I realize that the administration will be discussing their presentation regarding reconfiguration, which has been an ongoing narrative for the past 3 years. Since its inception, the topic of reconfiguration has done much to create an awkward tension between all stakeholders due to our differing perspectives and multiple hats that we all wear regarding this monumental decision that will affect our district and the community for years to come. These strained relationships are an unfortunate series of events for a school district who prides themselves as being a tiger family, helping kids to grow and thrive within a close-knit community. I wanted to really, truly, personally thank Dr. Warfel for requesting more information in regards to the educational benefits of the administration's previous presentation. As an educator of 15 years, I felt that I had needed more knowledge to personally understand the administration's position regarding those benefits so I could better understand their perspective. Now, for my perspective as a parent and the role that I take most seriously in life, and unfortunately one that I feel has been getting overlooked in both workshop meetings and the advisory council, is that of family inconvenience or family impact. I'm struggling to truly understand how a district that boasts its coverage of 1/3 of Lehigh County on their district homepage can even consider proposing this or accepting a reconfiguration given the location of its other elementary school building while continually comparing us to other districts of a much less staggering size. Currently, I'm able to have my children dropped off and picked up from school each day together. This allows them 30 additional minutes together before and after school that they would not receive if they were to take a bus. This time allows for the completion of homework, eating a cooked dinner as a family, and dropping them off on time to evening activities without being rushed, which is a feat celebrated by anyone who has kids. This allows for a reasonable sleep schedule for our very busy family due to that simple little bit of extra time after school. So while it might seem like a simple convenience, the time that we spend together as a family and our evening activities that my children engage in are also a major part of that formula that will help further my children's social and emotional development and education beyond what happens behind the walls of our district buildings. If we are to move to a reconfiguration, my family will be negatively impacted, not inconvenienced. As a working parent who works in the opposite direction of Weisenberg, I will no longer be able to pick up my children from school, which will force them onto a bus separately. Okay, we've been promised that bus rides will not exceed 60 minutes. Today, my children were home for 35 minutes because I was able to bring them home when we lived 2 minutes from the school. I can't trust in the fact that that 60-minute cap is a remotely reasonable time, and we won't even know that for sure until August if this goes through. My children who were previously able to be picked up will instead potentially be sitting on a bus for 10 hours a week, and they will not even be able to do this together. I truly can't see how anyone with children would find a staggered school schedule and the separation of siblings remotely acceptable. The educational benefits of my children versus being with me, or instead of being on a bus for 10 hours a week, far outweighs any of the educational benefits that I saw in the presentation, especially since I, for one, have always believed that my children were already receiving an exceptional education until I saw the presentation that paints a different picture. I know I'm just one person, but I needed you to truly realize that although it seems like a 10-hour bus ride, it's a lot more than just that. I know you're all in a difficult position and have a lot to consider, but I kindly ask that you give such a large decision serious consideration. And if you truly believe in the value of a close-knit community and tiger family, I hope you realize what this reconfiguration will do to that connection. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Snyder. Thank you for your comments and your letters.
All right, so Becky Height is going to give it a shot again, okay?
Okay, Mrs. Height, we'll try again.
Mrs. Height. You should be able to unmute Mrs. Height.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
All right. Sorry about that. Again, I'm also just going to talk about the reconfiguration really quick. On page 21 of the reconfiguration plan that the district sent out to the school board, you'll find some information on the parent-teacher organizations at both elementary schools. I was PTO president for Weisenberg when the plan was addressed 2 years ago, and I'm still involved on the board this year. With both groups, our boards are chosen the year before in spring, and the process starts in January to find new members. This change would shift what parents have children at what schools and where their involvement would be. The administration did not reach out to either group this time around before adding them in the slideshow and deciding how we would like to proceed. Our groups are registered nonprofits with EINs, bank accounts, taxes needing to be paid. It's not as simple as just merging parent organizations, especially prior to school starting next year. We both have funds that were raised by students at their respective schools that would need to be handled appropriately. These two parent groups are highly involved at both elementary schools, paying for field trips, assemblies, teacher supplies, and more. I just want the board to be aware that on top of the countless district changes that would need to take place prior to this, your parent volunteers would have a huge undertaking moving forward if this were accepted. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Height, and thank you also for your communications via email.
No, sir.
Anybody else?
No, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Mrs. Snyder and Mrs. Height, for your comments. There will be another opportunity at the end of the meeting tonight for courtesy of the floor to address the board. And I know that I'd like to make one comment about responding to emails. I think on social media there have been some disgruntled parents who feel that their emails are not being received or at least responded to. And I'd like to tell you that it is not board practice for individual board members to respond to emails. And this is because the official makeup of a board, the role of a board member has no authority to speak other than for him or herself outside of a board meeting. The authority for board members to take action has to be done in a board meeting and via votes. And there is really no easy way for individual board members to respond to emails by themselves. So we have always relied on our superintendent to respond to emails rather than have individual board members respond. And we do appreciate the input that we get from the community. There have been, judging from the lengths of some of these emails, a lot of thought and a lot of time put into composing these letters. They're very thoughtful and informative, and they are being read by the board, but it is just practice of the board member not to reply to them individually. Okay, anybody else getting in the wings? Dr. Sisnovic?
No, sir.
Then we will move on to the curriculum and building issues on the agenda, and I'll ask Mrs. Holman if she will walk us through the 6 items we have in that category.
I certainly will. Thank you, Mr. Delaker. I will actually begin with the first item and then certainly proceed to the others. This will be a lengthy in-depth presentation that I will begin with, and our administrative team is here in the room and some online that will participate in the elementary reconfiguration presentation. Tonight, good evening, everyone. We will summarize some of the information that we have talked about before in terms of issues and challenges that have led us to discuss elementary reconfigurations. As you heard in public comment, this is a discussion. Mrs. Snyder has been in the most recent reconfiguration, but you will hear some information about this. Has been an ongoing conversation for many years, back to even 2014 when we did our previous master's facility plan and enrollment study. So for many years, reconfiguration, moving the line, some sort of configuration changes have been a topic of discussion for some time. Most recently, as Mrs. Snyder mentioned, it has been this year. Tonight, we will go over some of our enrollment projections. The board is really familiar with some of the enrollment projections, both from PDE as well as from FutureThing, the study that was commissioned by the board, as well as class sizes. The board typically sees class sizes annually as part of the staffing plan, usually in May. So this is very specific to an option and discussion about elementary reconfiguration. Regardless, the board will continue as part of the budget discussions to see staffing for the district-wide staffing in May. Dr. Sosnovic will go over all of those, the enrollment projections, the class sizes, the capacity. Mr. Oaks and Mrs. Frisbee will go over the transportation talks and the runs. Our building principals, Mrs. Pulley and Mrs. Burlett, are here to go over some of the educational examples. As you heard during public comment, some of the board members did ask for some specific examples about the education slide that is in this presentation, as well as it was in the last one. Mrs. Lister asked about lessons learned from other districts and asked us to touch base, and so we have some of that information for you. I then will end with the staffing presentation, a parent survey question that was on our most recent survey, as well as ultimately a recommendation. If you could indulge me a moment, I would just like to go over the reconfiguration efforts to date, because I believe this is important because it did start and has spanned multiple years. The most recent review, as I mentioned, of reconfiguration started in 2019. It was an extensive process, as any change process should be. Anytime you're making change, and this is a drastic change too for the board to consider, it should be an extensive, it should be well researched, and it should have a lot of data in terms of the considerations the board will consider. As you know, the impetus for this is we have experienced capacity issues at Northwestern Elementary for many years. The most recent example was in 2014, the board commissioned a master facility plan that recommended at that time they thought the enrollment would decrease, and that the recommendation was made to not make any changes to our elementary schools at that time. In 2019, this plan typically is renewed every 1 to 5 years. The board commissioned LA5 to update our master facility plan. They also provided updated enrollment projections. So in April of 2019, at the board workshop meeting, the board of directors heard about the current facility usage, was presented a list of options and recommendations to address the facility needs at the elementary schools. That also included recommendations for our middle school, our high school cafeteria, and our field house at the time. The master's facility plan, as most of the board members are familiar, is a comprehensive process that is developed typically by an architectural firm, as was this one. It evaluates the needs of the district through a facility lens. So their job is to look at our facilities and maximize the use of the facilities. Typically happens every 1 to 5 years, as we have done in 2014 and then subsequently in 2019, and recommends the priorities for the next few years in facilities. As you can recall, the first phase of the recommendation from LA5 was a recommendation for it to consider options for the elementary schools to address the space and capacity issues that we were currently experiencing specific to Northwestern Elementary. That would allow us to better utilize classrooms that are not currently in use at Weisenberg Elementary, and there were several options that the board was presented at that time. 1A at the time was to realign K through 3 at Weisenberg, 4, 5 at Northwestell. 1B was to realign K2 at Weisenberg and 3, 5 at Northwestell. 1C was to redraw the district lines and address the expansion of the Northwestern Elementary cafeteria. 1D was do no realignment or no redrawing of the lines, and 1E was to return grade 5 to the middle school. Our administrative team at that time, as is traditionally charged, with providing options for the board to discuss all of the options as well as any potential solutions. We acknowledged at that time and in many letters to our families that none of the options are a perfect solution for everyone. Heavily weighted into our recommendation is to evaluate the option that most educationally, equitably, and efficiently utilizes our space for students who attend Northwestern Lehigh now and into the future. This recommendation does not come without a lot of research of best practices, advantages and disadvantages of all of the options that have been presented in previous presentations. Other variables including transportation, impact on parents, parent pickup, events at both buildings, staffing, professional development, schedules, use of space, and costs. In 2019, an advisory council was formed of 23 stakeholders of parents, staff, teachers, and board members to evaluate the research of best practices on educational structures, transportation, the impact of the transitions, and how the space impacted the students and teachers in the buildings. They designed a parent survey and a teacher survey, and there were several presentations that presented the educational advantages and disadvantages at each of the options from our elementary principals. And at the April 2019 meeting, the board decided to eliminate the choices of moving grade 5 to the middle school and K2 3, 5 as viable options for the district. The board at that time also solicited proposals for an enrollment study and ultimately contracted with FutureThing to perform this study. FutureThink's recommendation, option number 1, was to relocate students in grades K-3 to Weisenberg Elementary and 4-5 to Northwestern Elementary. And in their report, which is available at the QR code on your screen, as is all of the other presentations and communication, they summarize several key advantages in their research. All of the communications to families, as I said, are on the site, links to presentations, videos, should anyone want to go back and look at the presentation. There is a presentation there from January 2020, which provided a comprehensive overview of the presentations, the goals, the purposes, the summary of the research, the summary of the parent survey, the summary of the teacher survey, and ultimately a recommendation to remain in 2 K-5 schools for the 2021 school year. That January 2020 presentation also included the data gathered as part of the Advisory Council's research that indicated there is no conclusive research that indicates that one alignment is necessarily better than another. It is what a district does with the grade realignment that ultimately determines the success or the failure, not which grade alignment you choose. The research the council looked at spanned from the 1980s to 2018 and focused on 4 main areas: transportation and busing, school culture and community involvement, small schools, and transitions in grade span. We agreed that there are concerning challenges at Northwestern Elementary that need some sort of resolution. We agreed that we would revisit the enrollment data to make recommendations based on the best available data at the time. The goal and purpose from the onset has and continues to be the same. The district's goal is to ensure equity and enhance the educational experience for our elementary students. And how can we best arrange our K-5 buildings to achieve the most positive educational outcome while balancing the community's ability to financially support any new grade realignment facility or boundary for our schools? How do we determine what is most appropriate? And we need a solution that is a permanent solution to a long-standing challenge that this district faced. I will turn it over to Dr. Susnovic for enrollment and class sizes.
All right, thank you, Mrs. Holman. Okay, I'll begin by reviewing our enrollment projections. There were 2 sets of projections that were reviewed in 2019. The first was an enrollment projection by PDE. The second was a commission study by a K-12 enrollment consultant, FutureThing. PDE's projections are made available to all districts annually, and their last projection was posted on September of 2020. What's important about them is that they only report by grade span only. This means that they do not break down the numbers by school. Their projections are generated using a combination of a grade progression model that uses historical actuals and a modified enrollment model that focuses specifically on live births, which are basically the number of estimated births by school district. Currently, they're projecting our K-5 population to increase about 3% in the next 5 years and 8% in the next 10. So the questions we had were, how do their projections compare to our current day actuals? And what data should be used to provide the most conservative projections so it doesn't give the appearance of artificially inflating the numbers that support any one position? We actually contacted FutureThing to get their thoughts, and they agreed that using a straight progression model would provide the most conservative estimates. What I mean by that is we know that there's 121 kindergartners in our seats right now, March 17th. So we assume that they'll stay with us through the entire elementary life cycle. We do not calculate progression rates, which may add or subtract students in future years. We basically move them through the same number forward each year to each grade. So the top chart in blue shows PDE's projections, and the chart in the middle in green applies our actuals. What we see is a differential that PD is overprojected the number of our students in our classrooms. You can see this marked in red on the slide. However, this is not entirely accurate. We have to remember when we do any analysis, we have to acknowledge the limitations of the data we used. As everyone knows, COVID made this year unique. We've had a number of students, 40 to be exact, whose families elected to remove them from Northwestern because of COVID-related concerns. These are 40 additional students beyond those who are already attending these programs like Homeschool, Digital Academy, Cyber Charter. Our hope is that they're going to return to us this fall, but we still don't know if they will. Over the past couple of weeks, we've had our director of curriculum personally call these families to try to determine what their intentions are so we can best plan. Some of the families tell us that they will be returning. Other families tell us it depends if we are going to come back 5 days. Some other families tell us depends on what happens with COVID next year. We simply can't ignore these students in our planning efforts. So we explored the differential with them included. When we account for these students, you could see the over projections now become underestimates. But like I mentioned earlier, it was important for us that we didn't provide the appearance of artificially inflating numbers, so we didn't include these in our analysis of class size and capacity. The other item I want to highlight is that we know that there's a number of families that elected not to send their child to kindergarten this year. This is because they didn't want their child's first experience at school to include online instruction, masks, and other COVID mitigation strategies. Again, we're hopeful that they'll be attending our school next year, but once again, we did not include them in our projections and estimates in this presentation. As a side note, which I thought was pretty interesting, this kindergarten phenomenon is not unique to Northwestern. When we spoke with FutureThing, they actually shared that they've seen a 12 to 15% kindergarten enrollment decline across all the clients that they serve, and they serve hundreds of schools. The point I'm trying to make here is that even though we don't include these students in our analysis, we need to recognize the potential exists that all of these families, some of these families may return to us next year. But honestly, we also recognize, as it's been said in many of the communications we receive, if reconfiguration does occur, some of the families may choose to not come to Northwestern as a result of the programmatic change. The next slide, please. All right, so after examining PD's projections, we did the same level of analysis for FutureThing. As a reminder, FutureThing was a K-12 enrollment consultant. The board had complete an unbiased study in 2019. Their client base is hundreds of schools, and they complete enrollment projections annually for most of these schools. What differentiates FutureThing from PD's projection is the level of analysis they do to derive their projections. Not only do they look at live birth and historical trends, but they do an in-depth analysis of regional housing and township data. They also pull from GIS, US Census, and many other data sources. The other key differentiator in their projection is that they provide their projections at a building level, which gives us the ability to really examine those enrollment shifts by building. Like PDE, they do recognize an increase of our elementary population. They suggest an 8 and 7% increase at Northwestern and Weisenberg in the next 5 years, and 14 and 12% increase in the next 10. Next slide, please. Similar to PDE's projections, we applied that same conservative approach that I just described. By analyzing FutureThing's projections with our actuals. Again, we saw an overprojection initially, but when we examined the potential returns, we saw a similar underprojection for Weisenberg Elementary for the next year and a year after. To better understand these numbers, we asked FutureThing, what level of deviation can we realistically expect in these projections? They shared with us, as we all know, that projection modeling is not an exact science. It's like all modeling, and it's based on data that's available at the time and subject to change. Typically, they expect a plus or minus of 1% each year out from the projection. So year 1 would be plus or minus 1%, year 2, plus or minus 2%, et cetera. Typically by year 5, they recommend districts that are not as stable in terms of a housing market to get another projection, like to refresh the projection. Like I mentioned, districts that are experiencing large population swings due to housing growth or attraction, stuff of that nature. As you heard back in their April or November presentation, and what they share with us again, they don't believe Northwestern is that type of district, and that we are actually more stable just because of the land availability to actually build out different developments. The advantage that FutureThing has over PDE is that they really use that greater subset of data to determine their projection. Also, that they provide them at a building level. This is critically important because it allows us to examine those population fluctuations over time and where they're occurring, at which end of our district or which elementary school. That's really what gives us the ability to examine the class size and capacity. All right, so let's move on to class size. As a reminder, class size guidelines are determined by Board Policy 126. I have them up on the slide for you to see. Using the projections I spoke about earlier, this slide shows what we could expect our future classes class sizes to look like in the upcoming 5 years in a K-5 model. To determine class size, we basically just use simple math. We divide the total number of sections by the number of students in each grade. We know that not all sections divide evenly. But for the purposes of this presentation, we rounded to the nearest whole number. For example, if you look at the slide, it's Northwestern Elementary, kindergarten 21-22. They have 65 students. If you divide it out, it's not even. And that basically what we would have is 2 sections of 22, 1 section of 21, which would equal to 25. To make this easier to read, we marked in red any grade level that would exceed classroom guidelines. So you could quick at a glance see where we're going. As you can see, we can anticipate all sections to meet class size guidelines next year. Again, this does not include any of the students we mentioned earlier, but if we don't include them right now, we're going to be okay. However, in 22-23 school year, we're expecting a high kindergarten class to come in which will place both buildings above those guidelines. That number is going to be pretty accurate because this is based on live births. So these children are born, they're expected to come here at that time. It will be dependent if they moved out of the district or not. Looking further into the future, Northwestern Elementary is projected by 24-25 to have half of their sections exceed the class guidelines, while all of Northwestern classes will meet them. The exception really is that large class going through, like I just mentioned. But as you can see on the slide, this structure will ultimately create an imbalance in class size between elementary schools. The number of sections we have at each elementary building are at a level that provides little to no flexibility to adjust sections to meet the increases without adding teachers. For example, we could add a 4th section to that large kindergarten class coming in each building to handle that class size. But I will add, which we'll talk about in a minute, it creates another challenge. If we do add those teachers, as you'll see in a future slide, it creates another challenge for us because Northwestern will not have anywhere to put them unless we impact the program. Before I move on, I really wanted to highlight it's important to say that these guidelines can be adjusted by the board for higher class sizes. But as far as reducing the number of sections, for example, going from 3 to 2, we're at our limit. Because doing so, it will result in class sizes in the 30s plus. And I think we can all agree that's not educationally sound, particularly at an elementary level. Finally, continuing in this K-5 structure does nothing to address capacity concerns at Northwestern Elementary, and Weisenberg will continue to have 15 underutilized classrooms. However, if the board decides to reconfigure, as this slide shows, you can quickly see the benefits of grade banding. First and foremost, it provides a balanced class size across all grade levels. It also provides the greatest flexibility to manage student population changes, or even if other programs are needed or identified, by just adjusting our existing sections and using our existing faculty and staff. I'll give you a couple examples to kind of drive this point home. So if you look at 22-23, instead of hiring another kindergarten teacher, which we would have to do possibly, unless we accept a higher class size in that K-5 model, we could actually reduce the number of sections at Weisenberg second grade to 5 sections and move that teacher to kindergarten to teach a 7th section to handle that high class. Again, we're managing that population and that high class coming in with existing staff. The following year, we would take one of the kindergarten teachers and possibly reassign them to 1st grade. Again, following that large class, using our existing staff to manage the fluctuations. Right now, you're probably wondering, hey, honestly, Troy, that's great, but what happens in 24-25? Well, what we could do there is we could reassign a 4th and 5th grade teacher from Northwestern to a 1st and 2nd grade teacher at Weisenberg. So reduce Northwestern, 1 section each at 4th and 5th, and take those teachers and move them to 1st and 2nd at Weisenberg. And then basically we, as an administration, would make a recommendation to the board whether we will add an additional kindergarten teacher for exceeding the guidelines by a single student. Ultimately, this K3, 4, 5 structure allows the district to use our faculty and staff creatively to address these unforeseen challenges. I want to give you another example. Take this year's challenge of simultaneously teaching online and in person this year. We recognized early on that our students would have a significant learning loss if they only received live instruction 2 days a week and then non-live the other days. So even though none of our teachers have taught classes in person and online at the same time, we all embraced this model. We did it because it was what was best for our students. You could see the evidence of their efforts firsthand. This weekend, the Morning Call published an article regarding potential learning loss throughout the valley. Northwestern was one of the districts that saw a minimal impact in this regard. We had already been reconfigured. Had we already been reconfigured this year, we would have had an opportunity to possibly slide a teacher from 1 or more grades to handle those online only students. Basically not requiring our teachers to simultaneously Zoom to the degree that they are, and providing us the greatest potential to offer a full in-person learning model at the start of the school year. None of us can tell what the future holds, but regardless of whatever may come, this structure will offer the district the greatest flexibility to pivot and adjust to meet future demands and challenges at the elementary level. All right, so far we've explored projections, class sizes, and now on to capacity. This slide compares the breakdown of full-size classrooms utilized in both buildings by next year. For everybody's information, a full-size classroom is defined really by PDE. It's something what's called PlanCon, and the room has to be 660 square feet, and it can't be used for a special, like music or something along those lines, or special education purposes. In totality, Weisenberg has 46 full-size classrooms to use to meet their needs, whereas Northwestern Elementary has 29. Based on the projections we shared, we're going to need 36 total sections next year. K6, 4 classes next year. That means either 18 sections at Northwestern and 18 sections at Weisenberg for a K5 model, or if we reconfigure, we'll go 12 sections at Northwestern Elementary and 24 sections at Weisenberg if we reconfigure. As you can see, there is and will continue to be a disparity between space available for teachers and students if this K5 model continues. We're projected to have no full-size classrooms available at Northwestern Elementary, whereas Weisenberg will have 15 if we stay in the current K5 structure. This means Northwestern Elementary will not have the space for additional sections, current small group instruction, or meet the other needs without moving either speech, gifted, or makerspace, or music out of these spaces. In recent memory, we can't recall when speech has ever had a dedicated space at Northwestern Elementary. That program has always shared a room that's about a quarter of the size of a normal classroom, and they share it with two other related services, OT and hearing. The demands for speech have increased to the point in Northwestern where we now have two speech teachers teaching speech. This only creates, in addition, increases the problem of us finding space to offer these services. With regard to small group instruction at Northwestern Elementary, students that require additional support will continue not to have dedicated spaces to receive the help they need. Everyday IAs pull out students from their classrooms to provide guided instruction, to do makeup work, to offer targeted lessons. And every day they need to search for available space, like an open classroom because a class may be at lunch or at special, or a guidance office, or the office in the main office. And ultimately, when nothing's available, they'll do what they need to do in the hallway. In contrast, Weisenberg staff has the ability to utilize any number of classrooms to provide the support children need, free from distractions. I just want you guys to hear me clearly. This is not an indictment on Weisenberg, because they should absolutely use any available nook and cranny that is available to them to use. But these are just a couple of examples of the disparity between these two buildings. And it speaks directly to that point we surfaced at that last meeting, which is educational equity. We all know equity does not mean the same. It means providing each student with the resources they need. Those resources can be programs, materials, but in this case, it's space to provide these supports. We as a district can provide a learning environment equitably for students at Northwestern Elementary compared to Weisenberg, because Northwestern Elementary just doesn't have the space to do so. If we would reconfigure, all students would have access to a learning environment that would be flexible to meet their needs. Beyond that, we would have classroom availability to meet future projections if they come true. And finally, as you will later hear, this will allow us to better balance our programs and create opportunities for students and families that the current K-5 system does not allow. One opportunity that we have been recently exploring, and actually we've explored it in the past as well, is the potential for us to hold an after-school care program, excuse me. It's never been something we've been able to offer to families because they require dedicated spaces. And there's been no space at Northwestern for us to do so. Reconfiguration really makes that a reality for our parents. All right, so I'm sure all of you've heard enough of me at this point in time. So I'm going to pass the baton. Oh, go ahead.
Before you go, Dr., the speech that you were talking about, how many kids are in a speech? That's a remedial session?
Yeah,
I think.
and I'm actually going to toss this to either Mrs. Edmonds or Mrs. Pooley because they can speak about the specifics in terms of
How many
number of kids
there?
are in there and stuff like that.
Mrs. Polly, if you're okay, I could take that.
Sure, go ahead.
So, speech services are offered individually and in group sessions. And often in group sessions, we wouldn't have more than 3 to 4 children at one time, probably in time periods ranging from 15 to 30 minutes. But in addition, we do have individual sessions for some of our students. Some have both listed in their IEP, some have one or the other.
Thank you.
Before I transition to the next slide, any other comments? All right, so like I mentioned before, I'm sure you guys are tired of hearing from me, so I'm going to pass the baton along to Mr. Oakes to talk about transportation. But before I do, I just want to leave by saying that I know I just highlighted a number of benefits of reconfiguration is going to provide our students. But it would be disingenuous if we didn't also bring forward some of the considerations and possible downsides. Although we will stay within our 60-minute ride time, guideline that we hold as a district, reconfiguration will increase current ride times for some of our students on these buses. We have an idea how to lessen that, like we mentioned before, after care program and some other things that we have kind of thinking about. But we really are trying to be upfront here about all of our findings. So we're going to bring forward, if we say this is something that we have consideration, we're doing that. So Mr. Oaks, if you don't mind.
Yep, thank you, Doug. This is not what I want to say.
Sure.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. So what we did as a team here for you to look at on this slide is we actually went back to the 2019-20 data. The reason that we did that is because that was our previous year of full in-session reporting. So we went back to that data, we compared it to what we had as we left, when we left it at the end of the year, and restructured it as if all those students were breaking up into the reconfiguration. As you can see here, what we have listed on there is the 89.4% AM, 83.6% PM, 50 minutes or less. The reason that we chose that data point is originally when we were talking about transportation, there was concern if we can shorten the ride time. As a whole, Northwestern Lehigh School District has always taken the stance, at least on the transportation slide, to keep it a 60-minute ride time or less for students. And we do everything possible to achieve that. When we started talking about reconfiguration, it was mentioned, can we do it in 50 minutes? Transportation is filled with parameters. If we set the parameters for 50 minutes, we can certainly do it. It does cost more buses, it costs more people. There's many costs that come along with doing that, but we kept it at 60 minutes because that's been the standard of the district. However, we wanted to point out that the bulk majority of students are under the 50-minute time period. And it does cost more money to do this. It certainly is not, it's not free to transport now in a K5, K3, and 4-5 configuration. However, we've broken it down with the current list of students in the 1920 school year to 2 additional buses. Now, we are repurposing some of our buses as they return back. And what I mean by that is we oftentimes take out to charter private entity schools or schools that we place students in and they're returning empty. We're gonna sort of repurpose them on their way back through the district. They're gonna pick up some kids and bring them to the elementary schools. So there's some repurposing. Those drivers and buses are on the road anyway. They're already being paid for transporting because they have to return to the bus garage. So we figured why not utilize them? However, it does cost an additional bus at each building in order to maintain this. The other thing to keep in mind is that as we go throughout the district, it is far, it's from one end to the other. We took every consideration possible from the far end of Northwest Elementary to the far end of Weisenberg and bringing it back. Everybody, every single student, all 821 of them are accounted for and they were less than 60 minutes. This data, again, is based on the 1920 as we took that snapshot in time. As we go forward and we would look at potentially doing this for next year, that student list is going to be entirely different than the student list then. However, our parameter is still the same, 60 minutes or less, get those kids to school in time and have the smallest ride time possible. It's really the gist of it. As we go on to the next slide, I'm going to turn it over to Leslie shortly, but
I want to ask him a question.
I just want to reiterate, there is 2 additional buses, so there is an additional cost. We're not trying to hide that under any direction. We have it based on the actual mileage on those runs. We've calculated it, and Leslie will talk about that, but I heard a question, somebody. John, do you have a question?
Yes, Art, real quickly. The current bus ride is 50 minutes. Did I catch that correctly?
No.
On average?
We did not calculate it for currently. What we did is we calculated as if we were doing that reconfiguration.
Yeah, that was 60 minutes, correct?
Well, if you go back to that slide, just go back one slide there. If you go back to this slide here, in this particular setting, 89.4% in the AM or 83% in the PM would be 50 minat or less. However, the maximum ride time is 60 minutes.
60 minutes. One of my concerns is you have a child up at all the way up at Leaser Lake, that area up there, and then that ride from there down to Weisenberg. what kind of drive time are we looking at there?
Well,
That's under,
There's certainly a few buses. I'm just gonna go out, take you out by the Heights. Go out to the far end of the district out there to the Heights. It gotta go all the way down to Weisenberg. You know, we stop
Yes.
through there, and by the time we get to where Northwestern currently is, we've stopped picking up students because we have to account for that 20 minutes down to Weisenberg. So
oh, okay.
we still fit it under 60 minutes, and we purpose them as much as we can. Doing so, we've only had to add 2 additional buses, which I think is a credit to our team. It's not easy. It certainly costs a little more money, but it's doable. And we've had it structured out and the data backs it up.
Thank you very much, Art.
Yeah, and again, it's on paper, based on that snapshot in time. As we go forward, the parameter that is number 1 is that it's 60 minutes or less as we get into the new students. That's what we do. If it's over 60 minutes, we have to add additional vans, buses, whatever is needed. I could certainly bring that back to you. However, that data is not done until around August, once we get our last kindergarten students in.
Okay, but you're saying the maximum, according to your calculations, would be 60 minutes.
That is correct, sir, yeah.
But you're not sure yet because the data has to come in you said August, right?
The only thing that I'm not sure of is that it would be only 2 additional buses. If we have to add a van because a student is out there, let's say an hour and 10 minutes, then that's what we have to do. We would have to put in another van, another bus, whatever the case may be to get that student's ride time under 60 minutes.
Thank you, Art.
You're welcome. Any other questions for that slide? If not, I'll turn it over.
Where the most extreme locations are probably like what, up by Furnace Road all the way up along the mountains?
Yeah.
I was asking the most extreme locations. I know we think about Leaser Lake. I was just looking at it. Leaser Lake is 11 miles to Weisenberg, almost 8 miles to here. So it's really
Correct.
3 miles.
Yeah,
But the extremes are really probably Furnace, far to the
Correct.
northernmost.
Like on.
Furnace is about it, yeah.
Yeah.
And that is one that's calculated by the time we get here. We're done picking up
14.
students and we got to get down there.
Adds about 6 miles.
Yeah.
Art, just for my clarification, it looks to me like both AM and PM, we have somewhere in the vicinity of 200 kids or more who are on the bus that's saying between 40 and 60 minutes. We have no idea how many of that number is on the bus for 60 minutes, nor do we have, do we? We do?
We have
Do
a
we know, and do we know their ages? How many of them are 5-year-olds?
Yeah, I don't have we could pull their ages. We don't have their ages, but we do know how many are on 60 minutes, yes. I mean, I can get that for you. I don't have it right here, but yes, Art can pull it from the system.
Yeah, the system as I pull it out of the data points does go in 5-minute
5-minute
increments and it
increments.
goes by grade. So I took that data chart and broke it down smaller so that it's easier to understand rather than all those data points. But we do have that data that I could certainly get to you.
For me, my biggest concern is I think 6-year-olds, 5-year-olds, even 7-year-olds on a bus for an hour.
Mhm.
I don't get it. I mean, I don't know how that's a reasonable thing to expect of children that age, but that's why I'm asking the question. So there's no.
It's not unsimilar to what we do now. Some of our kiddos are on pretty long now as it currently stands. And I could get that as well.
Comparatively.
Yep.
How much
But
more?
Art, the blue is your current, right? So you're saying.
Well, that
there's-
1920
So
snapshot,
there's
yeah,
90 kids that are on the bus for 40 to 60, and that goes to
correct.
250.
It's hard to compare right now because there's
Yeah.
so much parent transport and virtual going on that it's just, the buses are not full. It's just not the same data point. I can't pull it for this year.
And Dr. Wolfel, that's what I was just going to reinforce what Art said. We're looking at 1920 data, the last known available normal transportation that we ran. So those, we could get you the breakdown of the number, the age, the grade of who's going to ride 40 to 60, but that was for 1920. We're not going to know what that breakdown is until August, until we get all of our kindergartners and we get all of the adds and removes. In addition to that, as he mentioned, it's on paper. These ride times reduce by the 3rd, 4th week of the school year because a lot of parents decide to, like they are now and have traditionally, do parent drop-off, parent pickup. So then the bus drivers naturally know this through either communications or lack of pickup, et cetera, and they adjust their routes. So you're looking at maximum exposure on paper with a final refinement that happens about the third or fourth week of the school year.
I think the other variable that's quite unknown is how realistic it is for parents who may do drop-off now to do it, given their work schedules, if they had to take kids to Weisenberg rather than here. It's another really significant unknown.
Yeah, and one thing I will mention on one of my slides later is there is, as Art said, we have buses in the district that are already traversing, I'll say unloaded. And we have a number of buses that do that in this scenario. So there's a slide later that will tell you the option for a shuttle bus, if the parent would like to do pickup at one and the other. Going one way, there is an additional cost if we wish to pursue that, but the other way, Art already has unloaded, I think 6 of them, unloaded already going in that direction. And so if a parent wished to do pickup, for example, all at Northwestern Elementary, the students could do a straight line on a shuttle bus from Weisenberg Elementary to Northwestern Elementary and pick them all up here.
Yeah, if we took this configuration as it is now with start times, you have to remember that when we go down to Weisenberg and we drop off, we essentially have those buses coming back to the bus yard. They have to return for middle school, high school in the afternoon anyway. The bus yard is the central point. That is where the bulk of the buses will stay. They'll stay in the bus yard. Those buses coming back empty, because Northwest Elementary at the moment would be starting 15 minutes later, those buses could essentially bring kids up. They're already coming up anyway. The driver's bringing them up. They could bring them up, drop them off. Mrs. Pulley could accept them. We would then have to pay to get them back. That would be an additional run. Leslie certainly has that calculation as well. And that is this particular configuration. We change ride times, we change start times, that's all variable. The biggest key to take away from transportation, it costs money. It is not going to be free. And basically whatever parameter you give us, we can achieve it. It's just a matter of at what cost. If you set a ride time for a specific time, for a specific age, certainly anything is achievable. It just costs a certain amount of dollars.
Dr. Moore, your point on the age, relative age of the kids for the long bus rides, it's going to change every year as the kids get older and new younger kids come in at different parts of our area. Demographics, if you call it, or age distribution around the area changes every year. So every time we look at this, it's going to be a whole new program that we have to develop to try to minimize these rides.
That is correct.
And there always are going to be kids, unless the people that live far away stop having kids, are always going to have kids, young kids going the far distances. Doesn't make it any easier, but it's just a fact of where we live and this community that we, this district that we have our 110 square miles to cover.
I think Joe had a question.
Hey, Art, yeah. Has there been consideration made for, say, a family with a first grader and a fourth grader? What time is that fourth grader getting picked up who lives at the far end of Weisenberg's district? And what time is the first grader getting picked up? Are we able to make it that they're picked up virtually the same time or close to the same time?
That's a tricky question and sort of adds on to what Mr. Deliker just referred to, that every single family has its own unique case. We've certainly looked at a snapshot of around 50 families, and we've had from minutes, from a few minutes to multiple minutes. If you average them out, I'd say it's roughly around 19 minutes, sometimes in between. But every family case, depending on where they are, is a different scenario. If you're down at Weisenberg, for instance, sometimes we have to account for that 20 minutes to get up here, or vice versa. So it's not always as easy as a definitive, 5 minute separation. If there's particulars, or when we get closer, certainly every parent will get that information, but it's not always just a few minutes. It oftentimes is 20 minutes.
I just think for those working families, it's hard to say that the fourth grader is going to get on the bus at 7 and the first grader doesn't have to get on the bus till 7:40.
That's correct, and I think Ms. Holman will talk about some of that, the options of that shuttle in between buildings, that we offer for the parents or for those needs. And again, that's something that we have to discuss and decide on, because that's an additional cost. And I'm not sure if that's reimbursable or not. I would think it is. Certainly Leslie and I would have to look into that. But if we wanted to provide that as something for our families, certainly that's something that you could tell us to do. And Ms. Holman will certainly talk about that later on in the slides as well. Leslie, you on?
Yes, thank you. So what I did was I took, Art sent me all of the detailed run information for the routing that he did, comparing the 1920 actual versus the 1920 reconfiguration, so that we had a good apples to apples comparison. And so then what I did was I extracted out of that the total miles for both AM and PM for, actual what that was run in 1920 compared to the reconfiguration for both bus and a van. And then the difference in those miles, what we did was we applied our rate per mile. And so that's that $1.24 for a bus or 62 cents for a van. That is a number that we calculate on an annual basis to really compare and look at transportation costs associated with, what's the cost per mile, the wear and tear, the maintenance on those vehicles. And so that's where we came up with the total estimated vehicle costs for the bus. Again, this is the difference in the miles of that 66,000. So what that means and equates to is that based off of rerouting for reconfiguration, we anticipate that given that complement of kids from 1920, we would anticipate driving an additional $66,000 worth of miles, or in better terms, an additional 53,532 miles on our buses, and actually a reduction of miles on our vans. So when we apply the estimated cost per mile for both the bus and the van, we're looking at that total estimated cost increase to run those buses of that 66,380, and then a decrease, again, because of decreasing the van usage, a decrease of close to $30,000. So a net increase in our vehicle cost of about $36,700. Then we look at the total wages. So on that routing and on all of those routes, we have the driver drive time. And so I extracted that for both AM and PM, compared the number of hours, and applied again a bus rate and a van rate based off of the actual wage rate that our drivers are paid. Applied to that a benefit rate to account for PSERS, Social Security, Medicare, those associated benefits that we have. And that's where that $36.24 per hour and $27.66 per hour for both the bus and the van is generated from. And then obviously just a simple math calculation to drive out that $26,706 increased wages associated with the additional miles and driver time for busing, and then a decrease of about $14,000 for van drivers associated with the decreased use of vans and the decreased miles on the vans. So when we net that together, we look at the total estimated cost for reconfiguration, and that again is being driven off of the difference of the 1920 actual versus the rerouting into that reconfiguration, where we come up with that $48,985. Now, again, Art mentioned that we are repurposing and we are using some of the additional vehicles. So a bus that's coming back from a charter school drop off or a non-pub is going to pick additional kids up and drop them off at one of the elementary schools. So really not focusing on how many additional, but looking at the total picture of the van, of the miles, as well as the additional hours to try to drive out a true cost. Now we know that, that could change, like you mentioned before, if we have to add a van because we have a kid at the far end of the district that we can't stay under 60 minutes. So this is what we believe based off of the complement of kids that existed in 1920. Additionally, we're looking at, obviously, if we're going to drive some of those buses and pick up additional kids as they're on their way back to the district, that's going to affect our reimbursement in a positive way. And so we have not looked at, the complement of now how many extra loaded miles we have that equates into additional subsidy. So this, we believe, is the gross cost on the expenditure side. We do believe, because we'll have students on the bus for longer periods of time, not for a longer period of time, but for buses that otherwise would have been returning to the district empty that are now going to be transporting students, we will see a slight increase in our state subsidy for that. Art also briefly mentioned, the potential for, I think we'll talk a little bit later, but a potential shuttle. We've costed out and looked at like how many miles, how many hours that would be equate for, the entire school year. And looking at those numbers, we think that would come out to about 14,000 for any additional shuttle or additional vans and things that we would potentially need to add. So I know when we previously talked about reconfiguration, we had factored about $100,000, a little more for additional cost. At that point in time, that was based off of what we were anticipating for additional buses, offsetting some cost of relocating buses to Weisenberg to store them there. We have not factored any of those additional potential things into this analysis. This is strictly looking at the actual routing and the actual transportation of those students across the district. Any questions on the numbers?
Yeah, Leslie, this is Bill. The numbers at the bottom of the sheet with the blue rectangle. Yes.
Yeah, so that box at the bottom then, actually, give me a second. So I just had a chat pop up in my view. So the box at the bottom highlighted in blue is what we're saying is the net increase in costs. And so then the two boxes below are just breaking out the difference between the Northwestern rerouting and the Weisenberg rerouting based off of that configuration. And so because we are eliminating some vans that currently existed at Northwestern, and how are we eliminating them? Well, based off of the new routing, those kids are now going to be able to ride on a bus instead of a van. We actually see a decrease in the overall cost of transport for Northwestern. So then that gets offset by the increase at Weisenberg. So we have about a $55,000 estimated increase to transport to Weisenberg. But again, with the offsetting decrease of the reconfiguration for Northwestern, we come up to that net cost or net estimated cost of about $49,000.
And Leslie, if I could just add, it's as the configuration sits now without adding those additional buses down to Weisenberg. We're not anymore. It's where they sit right now currently.
Correct. So if we would look at, if as we work through and would finalize this plan, if Art believes he thinks he wants to put additional buses to be parked down at Weisenberg, then certainly that's a mile calculation that we'll look at and potentially generate some savings for us in both miles as well as obviously driver hours. But none of that has been factored in, obviously, as a plan hasn't been finalized yet.
Let's see, just for clarification, I have a number in my mind from prior discussions that was a rough, just out of nowhere, I think, estimate of $100,000 in vacation cost. Is this the reality of what that number would look like now based on your calculations?
Yeah, so I think, when that 2 years ago, when we looked at this, we were looked at like 19 data at the time. And based off of the complement of kids and the rerouting that was done at that point in time, we were anticipating needing to add 4 additional buses. And so now when we rerun things, and like I said, mentioned about our utilizing our existing fleet and really trying to maximize the usage of our fleet, I think now it's driving out an additional 2 buses, which obviously is going to be less costly and less of a cost impact than 4 additional buses that were projected 2 years ago.
The other thing to remember is as we looked at that enrollment report, 821 students, I believe it was, for elementary, every single child is accounted for within Leslie's numbers. There's not one child, we've accounted for every one of them. So we're not missing anybody. Every single child is either the parent transport that they typically are, which is around 20 or so, and every other student is on a bus of ours or a van. They're accounted for in this calculation.
Good question.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's important to note, when you talk about potentially needing to add a van to pick up a kid to stay under the ride time, or something happens and we need a specialized transport, that's not unique to this situation of reconfiguration. That's the reality of the operation of transportation on an annual basis. There's always that ebb and flow, and maximizing our fleet and our drivers, as well as what the students' needs are and how we need to get the students to whatever school they're attending, whether it be ours or a charter school or non-pub, that adding or not needing a van or needing to buy an extra bus because we needed to add another bus run because of, students going out of district. That's the reality regardless of reconfiguration. And that happens annually, kind of as part of the normal process.
You mentioned the shuttle versus the vans, or is that just one of the same?
No, so I think Art alluded to it a little bit, talking about potentially addressing, I think one of Joe's questions was regarding the first grader and the fourth grader. And I think a little bit on the presentation, trying to brainstorm and say, how would we be able to address that, or how could we help resolve that for families? I think one of the ideas that we've talked about is potentially, your first and fourth grader get on the bus at the same time, and then your fourth grader gets shuttled up to Northwestern Elementary instead of mom and dad having to wait at the bus stop for a second bus to come in 20 minutes. And so that would be a bus that kids get on at Weisenberg, and we can shuttle them up to Northwestern Elementary to help with the timing and parents getting to work and, the craziness of mornings for families. Not final plan, and certainly that's something that I think Art can talk to a little bit better, but we tried to take that into consideration to say, if that's something that we ultimately would want to offer to help families, and because of, the various ride time discrepancies with kids in both buildings, we're confident that that would cost about $14,000 to add something like that. But again, that would be a bus, not necessarily a van, but obviously depended on the number of families and students that would take advantage of that.
I almost feel like you need to run two shuttles, one going one way, one going the other way, or you're going to have a child that needs to go, who's waiting for the shuttle to come to one school to get back to the other school. You almost should run in both directions.
Well, but you want to check it? Joe, you certainly could, but the reason we set it up the way it is because of the staggered ride time. You would have to drop at the first school, which in this case, the way it's currently set up on the building schedule slide of Mrs. Floyer and Mrs. Burlett, we'll talk about that on that slide, is that they are staggered start and stop times. So you would do the drop at Weisenberg Elementary for anyone who would be in K3 for a start time of 9 a.m. and then bring the student up to Northwestern Elementary, a fourth or fifth grader, for a start time of 9:15, and obviously in reverse.
So, and Joe, it's calculated in a sense of, if you're a parent and you want to do parent pick up and drop off for your family, you drop off at Weisenberg, but pick up at Northwest Elementary. Because in return, because Northwest Elementary is a little bit later in the day, we need to bring those younger kids up to meet their older siblings, so it's one parent pickup at Northwest L. So it's not at the same individual building. It would be parent drop off at Weisenberg, pickup at Northwest Elementary.
Yeah, I follow you.
Mrs. Lister, you have a question?
Yeah, I have a quick question. I know it's not in the projections, but if we were able to add another bus at maybe 25,000, what kind of impact would that make?
I can certainly run it. If we're trying to get to a particular ride time, that's the number that I would like to have, so that I can then go back and rerun the routes in general under that parameter.
Like if the board said we want 50 minutes, he would run it with a 50-minute parameter and see what it drove.
Then I would come back and tell you, I need 4 additional buses or 3, whatever it is. I would tell you what I need to meet that parameter.
Those buses don't exist.
Nope, well, we have plenty of buses.
They do. The drivers are harder
would
to
be
find.
the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you recall during, I think it was last month's presentation that Leslie presented in terms of the transportation slide, we have a number of extra buses. So when we say extra buses, they're putting them into rotation. It's not buying an extra bus. So the driver certainly has to be hiring a driver that doesn't currently exist, or moving a sub-driver that are certainly difficult to find.
Yeah, we typically have about 9 spares on the lot. However, 4 to 5 of them are going out for sports runs. So that really leaves 4 or so left if we need to add an additional vehicle. So if you go with the 4 to 5 number that sits up there at any one time for a breakdown, that's the number that we run with, because during spring, during fall, when we're running buses all over for sports as well, that's an additional bus that we need in addition to our daily run. So we don't they're spares, but they're really not. We need to actually use them at some point during the school year.
I was just reacting to the bullet point saying Rowdy was continued using the full complement of the district fleet to transport students.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, what Leslie.
That doesn't mean, okay.
Yeah, what that means, what that slide actually means in that bullet point is that as the buses are returning from non-pubs, charters, for a placement from a student, as they return in the district, they're going to pick up students and go to the elementary instead of coming back to the bus yard.
we always run a pretty healthy spare, either for breakdowns or spares for extracurriculars that run simultaneous to our run. And so the physical purchasing of buses to make it happen doesn't need to happen. Finding drivers and putting them on the road does.
So Art, every year we begin the bus runs with a calculated paper schedule based on what we know about the kids, where they live, which school they're gonna attend, which grade they're in. Now, when parents get into a routine and we start getting people who start driving kids to school instead of the bus, and the bus loads go down a little bit, is there can you project like an average of ride time decrease in buses as a result of parents bringing their kids to school, having less pickups?
I will say to you for elementary in particular, the numbers that we gave here are pretty accurate. Elementary is a lot trickier than the secondary education because you end up with a lot of student traffic. But in the elementary side, we have a lot of parents that will drop off one side or the other, but not both. They might bring their kid to school, but they can't pick them up, or they pick them up, but they can't bring them. So we still have to account for them on both sides of the run. We only end up with about 20 to 30 parents or families that opt out completely and say, you don't have to pick up my child. So it's
Not a huge impact.
It's not a huge impact. There's a lot of parent drop off or pickup, but not where they're opting out. These kids are still rostered for the bus.
Okay, should we continue? Okay, I will introduce Mrs. Pulley and Mrs. Burlett. The next slide that you see is the same slide from our previous presentation that had the summary of educational benefits. And at the last meeting, the board did ask for specific examples, which Ms. Pulley and Mrs. Burlett, as our elementary principals, are here to provide teaching and learning benefits, as well as answer some of the logistical questions that would come from any sort of grade realignment. Just remembering these are just examples, and they will give you some examples. They're not an all-inclusive list, but we were asked to provide some examples of the equity and the teaching and learning benefits, as well as some of the logistics. So I will turn it over to Mrs. Burlett and Mrs. Pulley to handle the next few slides. Okay, thank you. One of the programs that we're going to highlight here is our multi-tiered systems of support program, or MTSS, which you may have heard us talk about in the past. We currently use this program as a school improvement framework for all of our students. We use this framework to enhance our academic, our behavioral, and our social, emotional outcomes for all of our students. Our current structure is set up to serve students K through 5 in both buildings. You will notice that we did adjust the slide to clarify that our MTSS staffing in both buildings is equal. Each building has 3 reading teachers, and each grade level is assigned to one 30-minute time slot. We use this 30 minutes to group students based on their needs. The 3 reading teachers work with the 3 or 4 classroom teachers in a grade level, as well as 2 to 4 instructional assistants who support students across all grade level classroom and learning levels in the area of English language arts. That's how we are currently structured in both of our buildings. The teachers work together, they develop lessons, and they implement these lessons to support the students across the spectrum, from our struggling learners to our middle of the road learners to our higher achieving learners. There's a focus on phonics and phonemic awareness in the younger grades in order to develop those foundational reading skills for future reading success. And as the children continue to develop their skills, there's a shift to comprehension. And as children start to read to learn. The chart that you see at the bottom of this slide is a depiction of our kindergarten students. This shows you the breakdown of our kindergarten students who are below benchmark per building. It is very typical of illustrating those diverse needs that our children come to us with when they start their education in kindergarten. When you look at this slide at a quick glance, it would be very, very easy to say, why wouldn't you just move one of those reading teachers over to the building where there's a higher need? As we all know, our children are very different and their needs ebb and flow. They ebb and flow throughout the year. They ebb and flow across grade levels. Remember, our current structure is K-5, so it's 6 grade levels. So as those needs ebb and flow, so do the needs of our, not the needs of our teachers, so does where we need to place those teachers to support the students. So when you look at this quickly and say, just move a teacher, that will solve the problem. What that could potentially do is create a problem in another grade level for other students who are demonstrating various needs.
Okay, so the 3 scatter plots that are on this page represent composite reading scores. Thank you. The scatter plots on this page represent the composite reading scores for first grade students using data from the beginning of year and middle of year benchmark assessments. And for your reference, we use the Acadience Learning, otherwise known as DIBELS. While the charts that are shown here are only for 1 grade level, the purpose of showing them is to give you a visual of the data trend typical of each school in most grade levels. So in other words, the data trend that you see here for school 1 is typical in most grade levels for school 1. What you see for school 2 is typical in most grade levels for school 2. The charts help to gain a better understanding of how the MTSS program is implemented for all students. The red and green lines indicate the benchmark cutoff scores. The dots that fall in the lower left-hand corner of the scatter plots represent students that are performing well below benchmark. Those are students that would likely need an intensive support in order to demonstrate growth. This is usually in the form of a one-on-one session with a reading specialist or in a small group of less than 3 students. We often refer to this as a tier 3 level of support. The dots that fall below the green lines represent students that are below benchmark and in need of strategic support, which usually means a small group with a reading specialist. We refer to this as a tier 2 level of support. And the dots in the upper right-hand section represent students that have scored in the benchmark or above benchmark range. The students in that range are considered to be tier 1, which is often provided in larger groups and has the opportunity for enrichment. As you can see, there are also outliers that don't necessarily fall in a specific category for support. Our teams would look at these students a bit more closely to determine how to group them appropriately. However, we do sometimes have students that are not able to be adequately placed in a group due to their needs being unique. So they might be functioning very well in one group and have potential to be challenged a bit more and move to a bigger group, or a higher group, but they're not quite there yet either. So they kind of fall somewhere in the middle, and it's often difficult to find the right place for them, and there aren't other students that you can group them with easily. When looking at each school by itself, you can see that in school 1, there's a much more broad range and more students falling in the below benchmark range. In school 2, there are some outliers, but many students fall into an average cluster with fewer students in the below benchmark range. It's important to remember that in each school, there are 3 reading teachers that are providing support to students falling below benchmark with 1 dedicated 30-minute block of time. When you look at both schools together, you can see that overall students are more evenly distributed with fewer outliers. This means that our resources would be able to more effectively service all students, as well as be more flexible as student needs ebb and flow throughout the year. We began to use our MTSS model in 2016, and since then, our data trends have shown positive growth overall for students, with roughly 20% of our population in each building receiving tier 2 or tier 3 supports. By reconfiguring, we believe the MTSS program would be enhanced by providing resources and targeted support in a more efficient manner.
Can I ask a question? How are we currently set up?
Are you talking about staffing, Joe?
Yes.
We have 3 MTSS teachers in each building for 6 grade levels in each of the buildings. In just reading.
Right.
And if you wait 1 second, I think it's on the next slide where you'll see what it is and what it could be. Now we're going to explain how we envision our MTSS program in a K-3, 4, 5 structure. Please keep in mind that this is one example that we're sharing because it supports all of our students. While we are currently providing targeted instruction in English language arts, our resources are stretched thin because we're going K through 5. If we were to reconfigure in a K-3 and 4 or 5 structure, we believe we will realize additional positive outcomes. For example, in the K-3 building, we will have 4 reading teachers working with 5 or 6 classroom teachers, as well as 3 to 5 instructional assistants. That will allow us to group the students across a larger number of professionals to provide students specifically with what they need. We will be able to dedicate 2 30-minute time slots for our children with regard to our MTSS supports. We currently have 1 30-minute time slot, which is primarily some sort of pull-out support. With 2 30-minute time slots, we would be able to provide some pull-out support, some push-in support, dedicate the different times depending on what the needs of the children are. Our possibilities are really endless with this, and it will really depend on the time that the teachers spend together, really analyzing specifically those charts that Maria shared earlier, and really determining nitty-gritty where the children are. We currently do that, but as I said, our resources are stretched thin. So some of our children are falling into those intermediate areas that we might have to adjust for when we're instructing. The higher performing students would also benefit from this time because in that chart that Maria had shared previously, you saw that currently sometimes we have 1 or 2, maybe 3 students that are at that higher level. By putting all of the children together in one building, that would provide social opportunities for higher level students to be with other children who are performing where they are performing. They will benefit from interacting with one another, and there will be a large number of students that they will be able to interact with. A student who also is in one group who might be outperforming the group. We placed them in the group, that's what the data showed us. They were very appropriately placed and they start to take off. And it comes time to move them to the next group. And that jump sometimes can be very drastic because of our numbers of children and the needs that are coming forward. So sometimes we have to place a child, either keep the child in that group that they're currently in and provide them some scaffolded instruction to help move them forward, or decide to place them in the next group and again provide some scaffolding so that they can be successful. But sometimes that jump is so drastic that we have to shuffle the children, with all of the children together again with those resources of putting all of the teachers, the 4 reading teachers, the 5 to 6 classroom teachers, as well as the 3 to 5 instructional assistants. You have more resources, you have more children spread out across the spectrum, and you're able to group them more effectively and have those stopgaps for them as they continue to progress. Not that we don't do that already, we do that already. But sometimes it's that 1 child or 2 children that are getting some different scaffolded instruction, where if we, again, are able to place them with a number of students, they'll benefit from that social interaction, which language arts is a very social
activity in nature. Specific to the 4-5 building, we would be able to use the remaining two. Specific to the 4-5 building, we'd be able to use the 2 MTSS teachers to offer supports that more closely align with developmental needs at that age. So rather than a targeted focus on foundational reading skills or learning to read, there would be a targeted focus on the application of reading skills or reading to learn. Additionally, a math intervention teacher would be able to provide targeted math supports for students. Historical data has shown that math achievement in grades 4 and 5 tends to be lower than reading achievement. A math interventionist would be able to delve much deeper into root causes of low math achievement and provide targeted instruction to close learning gaps. In a 4-5 building, the MTSS teachers would also have the ability to team closely with grade level teachers to provide in-class supports for students for both PLA and math. This is especially important in the upper elementary grades because the content does become more rigorous. In both buildings, the K-3, 4-5 structure would allow flexibility to group students, as Mrs. Burlett has outlined, as well as provide push-in and pull-out support in a more consistent and strategic manner. While the example that we gave you for MTSS is specific to just that program, the benefits outlined will also be realized in other programs. Special education programs are available in both buildings. However, the same challenges arise as with MTSS when you spread resources across K through 5. For example, if teacher A at Northwestern Elementary has 9 students of varying needs and ability levels, and teacher B at Weisenberg also has 9 students of varying needs and ability levels, this could result in potentially 4 or 5 different groups for each teacher with only 1 or 2 students in each group, which in turn limits the time students are able to participate in small group directed instruction. If all 18 students were grouped together, we are able to maximize efficiency of instruction and personnel. There's a greater chance of being able to group students of similar needs, as well as increase the amount of direct instruction provided. A K-3, 4-5 structure would also increase the opportunity for least restrictive environment. And I will let Mrs. Edmonds share more information on that.
Sure, thanks, Mrs. Pulley. So LRE, if you're not familiar, stands for least restrictive environment, and obviously having students educated with their age-appropriate peers as much as possible is one of the focuses for IDEA and many school districts. So this isn't aligned with a federal and state regulation. It's also a component of the special education cyclical monitoring audit, which happens every 6 years. And as you know, we just completed the audit last year. The current state average is 61.5%, which ultimately what that represents is 61.5% of the state special education population is being educated in the regular education 80% or more of their student day. So we have made gains over the past 7 years. An example I can give you is in 2014, our LRE percentage was 51.1%. And we have continued to increase this percentage, and obviously really proud of those accomplishments, but we are still falling short of the state average. At our last determination was 57.9% in 2020. So we will continue to make decisions to have students educated in their regular education environment as much as possible. We also have to consider meeting their needs utilizing direct instruction in small group settings. So it's a little bit of a catch-22, but we certainly want to put students with their regular education peers as much as we possibly can. So the reconfiguration provides special ed teacher schedule and student schedule alignment by grade. Therefore, the example that Mrs. Pulley gave you, the potential exists for allowing students to be educated with their regular ed peers more often. And that's an example of her teacher A, teacher B scenario that she provided. So currently, to give you a little bit more of an example, we have in some cases, one case manager servicing multiple grade levels, therefore having to span across multiple schedules in those grade levels, which conflicts with specials, lunches, etc. So aligning some of those grade levels will offer the opportunity for teachers to provide less groups while providing push-in and pull-out services. Mrs. Pulley, you want me to give it back to you to continue? And then if you have any other questions about the next bullet there, I can certainly chime in as well.
Currently, not all specialized programs are available in both buildings. For example, emotional support and English learner services are only offered at Northwestern Elementary. With a grade level restructuring, we would be able to utilize existing staff to offer emotional support in both buildings, as well as provide English learner services in both buildings. For our gifted program, we often have 1 or 2 students in a grade level that receive gifted support in each building. They're pulled out for gifted with students in other grade levels. By having all students in a grade level together, there are increased opportunities for collaboration and peer interaction with age and grade level peers. Additionally, Carbon Lehigh Intermediate Unit operates 4 classrooms at Weisenberg. And again, I'll turn things over to Mrs. Edmonds.
Sure. So as Mrs. Pulley said, we have 4 classrooms at Weisenberg. I have been in consultation with the Assistant Director of Special Programs and Services for the IU in trying to determine reconfiguration of those classrooms as well. And based on their current rosters for the IU classrooms, we believe there will likely be a 2 classroom split in each building. And what that does is allow more even distribution for the IU classrooms within each building for the continuum in our district. So, you know, instead of a 4-1-1 spread, well, we would have 4 classes in the elementary, and then students proceed to 1 classroom at the middle school and then 1 at the high school. We would have 2 MDSB classes in each of the elementary schools. One of the issues that has currently come up, and Mrs. Burlett might want to talk a little bit more about this, but one of the current issues that comes up is as you're placing students out again into regular education classrooms with their peers, the numbers when you have all of those classrooms in one building are elevated in the regular education classrooms. Therefore, creating a space issue really with the amount of students and the amount of adults in the classroom at one time. So the spread of having 2 classrooms in one building and then 2 classrooms in the other building would hopefully prevent some of those issues for allowing students to go out at different times throughout their day.
Yeah, I can kind of just elaborate on that a little bit. As our class sizes continue to increase. So say, for example, I'll use 4th grade right now. My 4th grade classes are at about 24 and 25 right now. So when you include children from the MDSB classrooms into the specials, which we love to do, special area teachers love to invite them in. Our students benefit greatly from having them participate with them. You know, there are so many skills that they acquire as a result of including children from these classrooms that it's just really a benefit to everyone involved. But what happens is when you have 3 or 4 children who need to join one specific classroom, so say we have, I don't know, 8 children in 4th grade who need to go out. Right now, I have 3 classrooms to have them be included in. And so if you split them up, 3, 3, and 2, now our 4th grade classrooms are at 28 when they go to specials, or 27. That isn't always conducive, because when you do that, you have adults that go with the children. Sometimes it's 1 adult that can share amongst those 3 children that go in. Sometimes it's 2 adults, as well as children in our regular education classrooms that also have an instructional assistant that supports them when they go into the specials. So now we're up to 28 students, the special area teacher, that gives us 29, and potentially 2 to 4 instructional assistants that could be in there. So we're up to 32 or 34 people in a classroom. And what happens is with all of those I'll say adults in the room, it can become very difficult when you're giving directions and you have adults supporting different children and they're all kind of doing what they need to do, but it becomes a little noisy for our related arts teacher to be able to continue to teach and move everyone forward. By putting the grade bands together, you are now able to spread those children out among 5 or 6 classrooms. So that ultimately brings your numbers down with students as well as adults that are in the room. Is that, Mrs. Edmonds, is there anything else?
I think you did a really good job explaining that. And I sort of kicked that one to you because we've talked several times about those increased class sizes and what that does for teacher planning and then their ability to provide appropriate lessons to their, the same groups across that grade level.
Okay, so our building schedules slide. We know that there's been concern regarding how families would be able to continue to drive their children to school if they wish to do that. Therefore, we would plan on making adjustments to our building schedules. The school day at Weisenberg would be from 9 until 3:25, and the school day at Northwestern Elementary would be from 9:15 until 3:40. We would provide parent drop-off at Weisenberg from 8:40 until 8:55, and Northwestern Elementary would have parent drop-off from 8:55 until 9:10. That would give a parent who was choosing to drop a child off at Weisenberg, say at 8:40 or 8:45, they would have approximately 25 to 30 minutes to get their child to Northwestern Elementary. Parent pickup times would also be adjusted. Parent pickup at Weisenberg would run from 3:20 until 3:40, and Northwestern Elementary would have parent pickup from 3:35 to 3:55. Again, providing approximately 25 to 30 minutes for parents to travel from one building to another. As you've heard, we are exploring the possibility for a student bus shuttle to allow for one drop-off and pickup location for our families. Do you want to add anything to that?
No, and certainly if they have any questions, like we can certainly answer them on the pickup on the student shuttle.
Just as a point of reference, so, I live all the way, almost the farthest in the district, is what I've calculated are, and my kids, and I shuttled back and forth quite a bit. So that drive from Weisenberg to Northwestern is about a 16 to 17 minute drive, getting no bus, so there's plenty of time.
As I do it very often as well. Both buildings would provide students with art, library, music, and physical education, which we do right now. We would do it for 50 minutes each week in each special. In the K-3 building, the students would operate using an A through E cycle, which would allow a day for teachers to visit the makerspace at least once a week to integrate STEAM activities. In the younger grades, the children would have the opportunity to explore the tools in the makerspace, and as they become proficient in using the tools, the teachers would focus on integrating STEAM into their core content areas. In the 4-5 building, the students would operate using an A through D schedule. Again, 50 minutes. The related arts teachers in the 4-5 building would also have the opportunity and time during the day to provide students with a variety of clubs. All students in grades 4 and 5 would now have easy access to the high school STEAM lab. It would provide students with a STEAM club experience on site at Northwestern Elementary, and they would be able to collaborate regularly with the high school STEAM lab. It would enhance what we're able to do currently with our makerspace programs. Currently, Northwestern Elementary can collaborate daily if they choose to do so with the high school STEAM lab. To make that happen from Weisenberg, it's not as convenient. Certainly it can be done, but certainly not as convenient as it would be for all of our 4 or 5 students if they were in one location. Our broadcast studio would continue to be used in both buildings, and we would develop a continuum of broadcasting skills for our students. In the K-3 building, the production would be more of a morning show and more of a welcome and announcements. And the students in 3rd grade would do this for their school. In the 4-5 building, the broadcast would be more of a production. And again, the time would be dedicated through the club offerings during the day that the related arts teachers would now have in their schedule. Using our existing staff, we will also be able to offer both band and chorus to students in 4th and 5th grade. We currently have band and chorus for our 5th grade students. Special area teachers in the 4-5 building would also have time in their schedule to provide specials to students learning 100% online. Finally, by banding our grades, our schools would be able to narrow our focus on the developmental needs of those grade bands. We'll see improved consistency with curriculum and instruction. There are differences that occur based on our lunch schedules, our special schedules. We try really hard to make sure we're providing all of our students with the same number of minutes of all of the subject areas, but there are inherent differences just based on our lunch schedules and the number of children we can fit in the cafeteria. Weisenberg has the luxury of putting children through that cafeteria. It's a much larger space. Maria sometimes has to have a longer lunch time frame to fit all the students through the lunch line and having their lunch and recess. So there are inherent differences just based on those idiosyncrasies within the buildings. The differences aren't huge. They hear me say that. They're not huge, but they do exist. Collaboration among staff members will be consistent and ongoing. We currently do this across the buildings, but it's certainly not on a daily basis. Networking will occur naturally among all grade level teachers when they're in the same location. And all of those great ideas that our teachers have will be readily shared among all of them within a grade level. By bringing all K-3 and 4-5 students and staff together, the students will consistently receive the same instruction at the same pace, and our scheduling differences will be able to be minimized. Our Tiger community, just as we're able to unify curriculum and instruction, we will be able to offer all of our students in K-3 an opportunity to form friendships with all of their peers throughout the district. We realize that the reconfiguration will result in an additional transition for our students. However, the children will be transitioning together. The concern of not knowing others will be minimized to an extent because all of the students will have been together throughout their K-3 education. As I stated earlier, natural networking will occur on a daily basis because of the proximity of our teachers. Having all grade level teachers together under one roof will provide them with an environment to collaborate each and every day. We currently have built in 11 opportunities for this with our professional development plan. However, we often have mandated programs and trainings that we have to provide for our staff. So that does eat away at that collaboration time that we so diligently set aside, but then something is thrown that we have to share with our staff. We would also provide opportunities to continue to build the Tiger community by bringing the students in both schools together for various performances. Our music teachers just received some awesome awards, so that is definitely something we will capitalize on and provide our students with those performances to continue to build that community. Third graders would have increased leadership opportunities, which could come in the form of supporting younger peers through a buddy program where they could read and write together. Not that we don't already do this, we do this, but we tend to go to our 5th grade students. And they're the buddies for our maybe even 3rd grade students, our kindergarten students. So it would be a focused 3rd grade experience for the children through this type of program.
Which would help them in their transition to 4th grade. For students in grades 4 and 5 building, they would experience an increase in independence, community engagement, leadership, and responsibility. We would explore the implementation of team teaching, which would allow teachers to go deeper into specific subject areas and purposefully plan for curriculum extensions. That could include community service and other interest-based projects. Routines, programs, and activities would be geared specifically with the developmental needs of grades 4 and 5 students in mind to encourage and support a child's self-awareness and self-regulation skills. Additionally, our staff would develop a school-wide positive behavior support program that's specific to this age group. We both at Northwestern and Weisenberg currently, we have school-wide positive behavior support programs. However, again, in a K-5 structure, we often need to adjust how we direct that to our primary learners as opposed to our older learners. This would include expectations, a reward system, and incentives that students in grades 4 and 5 find motivating and exciting, as well as encourage positive character growth, teamwork, and collaboration. Our school counselor would be able to offer more group sessions focused on needs that are typical for students in upper elementary, such as friendship, self-esteem, and responsible decision-making. Career readiness would also be included more intentionally and in collaboration with community partners.
One of our favorite things to do each and every year is to welcome our youngest Tigers to school. It's one of the happiest, most joyous days of my year, and I think for many others. We will continue to offer a kindergarten orientation held the week before school starts. Our kindergarten students and their families would have the opportunity to visit the school, meet their teacher, learn about being a Northwestern Tiger, take a bus ride, and begin to build relationships with their teacher and classmates. We also realize that if we do end up reconfiguring, our current buildings will have many students entering a new building. Therefore, we will also offer an opportunity to orient the students to their new building. The children and their families will be provided with time to tour the new building and learn about the new school before starting the new school year. The next opportunity for our students to be in their school would be open house. Time will be provided for the students to enter the building, see their classroom, meet their teacher. We'll use this time to help the students acclimate to their new classroom. They'll be able to see where they're seated, who's in their class. Our goal with this is to help students have a better idea of what they will walk into on the first day of school. The first day of school brings with it many, many emotions, including nervousness as well as excitement. Our hope is that we will be able to alleviate some of that nervousness and the students will be able to experience more excitement for their upcoming year.
We recognize that the transition from 3rd to 4th grade will be an additional transition compared to our current elementary school structure. We're committed to making it a smooth transition for all students. The students will all transition together from Weisenberg Elementary to Northwestern Elementary, and our goal is to offer several opportunities for our students to become familiar with Northwestern prior to attending in 4th grade. Specifically for our 3rd grade students, our counselor at Northwestern Elementary would be able to teach 3rd grade guidance lessons, which would serve as a natural opportunity to establish positive relationships with 3rd grade kids. The Northwestern Elementary principal would also be present for 3rd grade students throughout their last year at Weisenberg to aid in the transition process. We believe that having all students together in grade 5 will also support a more natural transition to the middle school. As I said before, we would explore team teaching, in which students would travel to more than one teacher for different subjects, similar to how the middle school operates. Additionally, students would have similar experiences, such as visits to the high school STEAM lab and access to other resources that are currently only available on the main campus. We already do a lot of things very well in our schools. Our goal with Reconfiguration is to enhance our schools as best as we can to serve our students and families. In addition to enhancing our school-wide positive behavior support programs to be appropriate to each grade band, we also believe that through Reconfiguration, professional development would be more purposeful and applicable to staff roles in each school. Staff across both buildings do have opportunities to collaborate on in-service days and throughout the year. However, there's a great deal of value in the day-to-day planning and preparation that comes with being in the same physical location. Our teachers are experts in their field, and they serve as wonderful resources for one another. Mrs. Burlett and I value and appreciate partnerships that we've created with our PTO and our PI. We're very committed to continuing this partnership and hope to create one parent organization that benefits all students at Weisenberg and Northwestern. We believe that having one parent organization would support our Tiger community in the best way possible and support in the transition of our students throughout their elementary years. However, we do respect the input from our PTO and PI leaders. Should the board decide to reconfigure, Mrs. Burlett and I would begin discussions with our current parent organization leaders, as we recognize there are several items that we would need to complete if we were to merge the organizations. And at this time, I believe Mrs. Holman is going to take over unless there are any questions.
Did we skip, I think we may have skipped the initial slide in this section. Did I miss something? Before the MTSS discussion, was there not a slide also about?
The slide before the MTSS was the same educational slide from the previous presentation that I presented and then turned it over to the principal. So that's the slide you mean?
No, yes, if we go back before this one.
Number 13.
Yeah, I certainly didn't review that. I can. This is the same exact slide that I reviewed in the last presentation that kind of summarized the educational benefits that prompted the question. Can you give us some examples in terms of educational equity and teaching and learning benefits? And I think Dr. Werfel, you called out several specific bullets that you wanted.
I did, and we didn't discuss them. I see some. Okay, I'm going to assume that they've been answered later, but one of the ones that you didn't speak about, that I have a question about in my mind, is the issue of curriculum consistently delivered across grade levels, collaboration. I think earlier there was a discussion about improving the consistency, maybe it's the same way, consistency of curriculum delivery at each grade level. And I'm hard pressed to understand why, oh, I'm sorry. The issue is curriculum consistently delivered across grades. I'm hard pressed to understand why that would be an issue with the school district, given the effort that we put into curriculum development, making decisions about teaching, what's to be taught, how it's to be taught, how it's communicated to teachers, how it's supervised. So I'm having a hard time understanding that would be a significant.
Well, I think Mrs. Burlett described it and said there are small idiosyncrasies, I think is the word she used, between each building. They're not significant in nature in terms of the classrooms, but when you have, I think her description when she addressed that point was 5 or 6 sections of teachers that are daily allowed to collaborate. And Mrs. Pulley mentioned in terms of them being right next to one another and sharing the expertise among the teams, not just on 11 in-service days, but 180, 191 days of the year, they are able to share some of the resources and activities. Because the curriculum is a written curriculum and it gives several examples, but as you know, art of teaching and the way each teacher teaches it, they sometimes come up with inventive ideas or projects or ways in which the teacher can certainly share that with one another. I don't know if either of you want to add to that, but I think that encompasses the pieces in both Mrs. Burlett and Mrs. Pulley that they mentioned to address that point.
And I would probably suggest Dr. Warfel looking at that there probably should be a word before curriculum consistency to remove that ambiguity that bullet may be offering. That word may be enhanced or increased. So we are already delivering our curriculum consistently across the grade levels, as both of our principals just outlined, but doing so in the manner in which they mentioned eloquently just now will allow us to enhance that curriculum consistency.
So I think there are a couple of issues that I came here with the line that I would like to leave in people's minds to think about as we move to it. You use the issue of the word just now, which is on significance. And for me, the standard of all of this is whether or not these things rise to a level of significance that justifies what we would be asking this community to support. And I think that's something we should all grapple with in the next 2 weeks before we make a vote. For me, personally, a number of the issues, the MTSS, I understand the significance direct to achievement. I understand the issues related to special education. A lot of the rest of this, I have a question in my mind as to whether or not it reaches a standard of significance that will justify what we're being asked to do, given the opposition that exists in the school district. So that's just a statement. I'm putting it out there because I would ask my colleagues to give that some thought between now and the time we vote.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And I think that there are some things that are problems that need to be resolved in terms of space or capacity that are in a circumstance that's not a tolerable circumstance. I think there are equity issues and I think there are enhancements. And each individual person around this table and in this community is going to have a different measure for which things on there matter more or less to them and of significance in their mind. I think these are just we were asked to provide specific examples in terms of things that benefit and are enhancements for all students in the teaching and learning, which was the bullet slides on the educational side that you see on your screen. But I agree with you, everyone is going to have to ultimately make up. And I would say, and I think you and I have had this conversation before, none of them in singleton should be the reason. It's the composite of the overall issues and challenges we're trying to address and the enhancements we can provide that the board needs to make the decision, is this the move we want to make?
I just want to leave it out there. And also, I think the other question I've really been struggling in my mind, to what end? This district graduates a terrific product as it is. Yes, we might make enhancements, but are we making a dramatic change for enhancement when we already have a really quality product that we produce at the end of the line? It's a big ask of people to do it for enhancements. You can always make things a little bit better. It's the old adage between you're going to drive a Chevy, you're going to drive a Cadillac. And I think it's something that we should let weigh on us for the next 2 weeks before we make that decision.
I agree with you. What I also would add to that is I think you need to think about the sustainability of that same quality of education moving forward and whether we're able to continue that same quality of education given the circumstances that exist in our K-5 buildings.
Okay, I'm speaking specifically about this discussion about educational growth. I'm not speaking about the unresolved issue of numbers and class sizes. That's a separate issue, but I'm focused just on these slides that we just discussed. I would like to leave those slides out there, not just totally be resolved, but the plan book.
I had asked in the prior meeting as well about sort of the the educational opportunities. Really appreciate what you put together here. To me, this weighs heavily in my decision, here, or how I will vote on this matter. Because it comes down to something that resonated with me. Somebody said earlier here around educational equity, right? You see it in the numbers. There isn't educational equity today. Somebody said there isn't educational equity today between two buildings. We know that the two buildings are incredibly different in their configurations logistically, which creates challenges, right? And I think we as a board have an absolute responsibility to ensure that we are providing adequate educational services to every student in this district, and the education has to be what comes first. To me, it's going to come down to weighing whether or not 15 minutes or 20 minutes extra on a bus for 40 kids, 50 kids, 60 kids comes down to providing adequate and equitable education for the entire school population K through 5. So I think you did a great job. I think there's some really interesting things to me. We looked in previous years, we looked at music, for example, in the 4th grade, eliminating that never sat well with me, because we see statistically, and the research has shown, an incredibly high correlation between music and math skills, STEM skills. That to me is an interesting opportunity that gets enhanced here with this program. I think there's several, right, that jump out to me that really provide. You talked about the gifted program. You talked about providing enhanced services for kids on both ends of the spectrum, as well as the middle group, as you said. So I think I have to weigh more heavily: is this going to provide better educational services? Does this leapfrog us to provide a better program, or are we happy with the status quo and then dealing with potential cost implications of renovation of Northwestern Elementary? That was on the table a couple of years ago. Significant impact on that side of things. So I also have to say, look, none of it has to be permanent, right? I mean, that's how I would look at it and say, if we were to do this configuration and find out that it was an absolute mistake, we can always reverse course. So nothing is permanent. I think I will certainly support this decision as it's been laid out here.
I'd like to go back to slide 20, where we talk about transitions. And just bring us back, I guess it's like 27 years ago, when we had a significant reconfiguration decision in this district to go with the middle school. And that was a very controversial topic at that time, and it not only created the transitions that we've been talking about between buildings and changing programs, and it's a whole new educational system with a middle school program. And not only that, it cost us a building. Well, I don't remember how many millions of dollars it was back then, but I think 12 or 20, I don't know, but it doesn't matter. My question is, and we've always talked about the kids in middle school and how we call them awkward, and that the hormones are starting to develop, and it's a group of kids that is moving through that middle school that has different needs and behaviors than the high school or the elementary kids. It's that transition through middle school. And the question I have is, have we looked at the advantage of bringing our elementary schools together so that tigers become friends with each other in kindergarten and move all the way through elementary school as a class? And instead of currently moving our 6th graders or 5th graders into middle school and meeting a whole new set of friends that they've never met before, half of the kids are new to each other. It seems to me that would be an advantage of having kids that have been together since kindergarten, moving through 5th grade, moving into middle school together as a group to take just one thing, one obstacle, one stress out of their lives entering into the middle school. We don't have any middle school teachers here, but you all know, I think, what I'm talking. We have a principal. That to me, that is a transit. That is an advantage, I think, that we haven't really addressed, but it just jumped out at me as I was looking at this slide, thinking of that transition from currently from 5th grade into middle school?
I mean, I'll certainly address that a little on the slide where we learned from other districts, because that was something that the one district called, I'll say it, a perceived disadvantage. There's a lot of research that the advisory council did on the impact of an additional transition. What you can't measure necessarily is how that impact is either enhanced on the front side when they're unified from the beginning, or when they transition together to the next level. And it's the same perceived negative impact to an additional transition, mitigated or even potentially enhanced when they're going together. And the other part to remember in terms of staffing from one building to the other, and this is not for sure, but teachers in most cases like to stay in their subject area. So the assumption that the buildings are going to stay the same in terms of teachers, and the Weisenberg students are going to come to Northwestern, there's going to be nobody they know. The 5th grade, and I'll just use 5th grade, although I don't look at the 5th grade survey results, but the 5th grade teachers are likely to want to teach 5th grade wherever 5th grade is located. And so the same groups of teachers will just move buildings. And in fact, this will probably move the majority of our staff to a new location, because they oftentimes prefer to stay in their subject area experts. But there's the good and bad side of transitions, depending on the research you look at. And this is evident from the advisory council research as well as now, that we will create an additional transition. We're cognizant of that, but I don't know how unifying them from the beginning and then going to the middle school together instead of combining two separate groups has an impact. But there's an impact. There's a positive and negative impact of that.
May I comment on it? First of all, go to your point about what happened 28 years ago, whenever it was. Northwestern Middle School was not built to be a program. It was built to solve a space need in the school district and to house kids. When the decision was made to build that school, I was curriculum director, assistant superintendent. We had no idea what the program was going to be. We were told, here's the solution to our staffing, our problem in the school district. We're putting 5th through 8th grade together, figure out what to do with it. At the time, middle school concept was brand new. We didn't even know what it meant. We spent 3 years, I think 3 years, 2 years, planning what that would look like. So the program model did not drive that school. Figuring out what to do with the enrollment issue, which is not unlike what we have here to some extent, drove what the program would look like. Now, I've been principal of 2 middle schools here where we accepted 6th, 5th graders at the time from 2 buildings. In South Brunswick, where I welcomed classes of 400 kids from 5 different school districts, 5 different elementary buildings into the school. It was never a problem. It was a time of great excitement for kids to come together and make new friends and to mingle. It never rose to any level of significance as a concern. So it may be better to do it that way, but I can tell you from personal experience, it was not a problem the way we've done it. And what I would say is that kids, it was great. I'm meeting new friends. So there's a different side to it.
Okay, I will take over from here. We did on our most recent survey when we sent it out in March, ask one question specific to elementary reconfiguration. It was the instructional model survey, asking families what model they would choose for the 21-22 school year for their instructional model so that we can make some preparations for class sizes, et cetera, moving forward. There was one question that if your child could attend school 5 days per week for the 21-22 school year, do you support this? It is obviously split down the middle. That is not surprising in terms of the response. 39.4% saying no, 38, I believe that says yes, and about 22% in the middle in baby. Mrs. Lister, as we mentioned, asked in the last presentation, and we had previously done this, but I actually did it again more recently.
looked at the data from other school districts in terms of top performing elementary schools. Grade bands across the county, as well as the Commonwealth, as well as the nation, obviously vary. There are three methodologies and organizations that rate top elementary schools. This is for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and this is the newest data from 2021. Obviously, you'll see the grade reconfiguration changes. 10 elementary schools in Pennsylvania for niche for 2021 are some sort of grade band configuration. In that case, it was K4. 4 of the top 10 for grade schools are either K4 or 3-5. 3 of the top 10, according to the Public School Review, are K3 or K4. About 20% of the school districts in the state of Pennsylvania have some sort of grade banding. Obviously continues across the Commonwealth to vary, and there are 9 school districts locally in IU 20 or 21 that have some sort of grade banding. One of the questions Mrs. Lister asked was that, are there other local school districts have recently changed that we can learn from their experiences? So I did contact 2 local school districts that did reconfiguration specific to the elementary level in the last 2 years. Very different experiences, very different school districts. One of those school districts is, I know to mention earlier in terms of our size, I believe it was Mrs. Snyder who mentioned our size. One of the other school districts that I did talk to is similar size, not quite as big, but certainly larger in number of students and comparable in square miles, and also recently did a reconfiguration. So I asked them both very similar questions in terms of advantages and disadvantages, asked specifically about transportation prior to and what the impact was actually, how far away their schools are from one another, as well as how many square miles the district is, to try to get some comparable answers to things that might be similar to ours. So the things that you see on the left are really unedited, kind of what they gave us. So the advantages they listed, you'll see them on the left. They're very similar in advantages to some of the same things you heard tonight. I won't certainly read all of them, but you'll see different things like the learning support teachers having smaller grade spans, the grade level consistency. One of the particular schools was a K2, 3, 5, and so they made a targeted intervention in a similar way of what we were proposing for MTSS, and heavily resourcing the MTSS model in the elementary school that was K2, and they were able to achieve 95% of their children reading on grade level by grade 2. And then you will also see there things like avoiding discrepancies between buildings and the consistency in intervention resources. When asked about the disadvantages from the grade reconfiguration, one of the 2 schools simply said we have not experienced any disadvantages. And so that's why that's there. The other school is in a slightly different circumstance that involved closing a school, which is why the answers were we lost one of our neighborhood schools, as well as a potential longer bus ride for some. Now that school is recently configured this year, and so they didn't know the impact to transportation because of the high number of parents that are transporting this year. And I spoke about this in the earlier comment, I believe, when I talked about to Dr. Warfel. The one school did say there was a perceived disadvantage of an additional transition. However, when children realized that they were transitioning together, that's why they said it was perceived.
Let's just make a comment about the top of this slide, because it struck me as that I'm not sure about the validity of that information or why it's even there. 2 out of the top 10 elementary schools go one way, so that means 80% go. 4 versus 60, 3 versus 70. More importantly, I have no idea how those band configurations have anything to do with the achievement of those schools. We don't know anything about the social status. We don't know anything about the demographics of those schools, which are major contributing factors to what achievement looks like in a school district. So I question that information. I don't think it adds anything to the discussion.
Understood.
Okay.
The next slide is about staffing and class sizes. This will branch off a little bit of Dr. Systemic's presentation from earlier. This will branch a little bit off Dr. Systemic's presentation from earlier in terms of staffing and class sizes. As he said, in K5, we run 36 sections. That is 3 sections in each grade level across 6 grade levels in each building. We do have 2 elementary retirements coming up in June 2021, both of which I believe you've taken action on. And so we do have, as I said earlier, when we present the May staffing presentation, we will have a decision point regardless of what happens in terms of reconfiguration for the replacement of those teachers. And so if we remain in a K-5 model, I believe we have two options. Could replace both teachers that are retiring and continue with the same composite of 36 sections. As you see in the K-5 model in both buildings, if we did not want to replace the teachers, certainly for financial challenges, we're trying to close almost $3 million, a little more than $3 million budget gap. We have tried to look for savings and attritional savings when people leave. And is there a place that we can eliminate teachers but still maintain our programs and our class sizes? And so you will see grade 4 is really the only opportunity that you probably could do that, because that is the classes that are the lowest at 57 and 54. But as you see, if you take it down to 2 sections in grade 4 in each building instead of 3, it will drive out 4th grade class sizes of 27, 28, and 29. They will exceed our class size guidelines. And I would tell you that even if, this board has certainly discussed class sizes and moving them a little bit in terms of the board policy or guidelines, but 27, 28, and 29 is certainly well beyond any of the class sizes we've had in many years. If we do reconfigure K3 and 4-5, we could not replace a teacher in 4th grade, and that would have class sizes of 22. The other option would be to await our kindergarten enrollment, which is currently in process. I do have our current kindergarten enrollment numbers to date. We are in April, so we're very early on. So we have 98 kindergartners that are currently registered for kindergarten. So about 75% of our expected projected enrollment is already registered. I don't know what that will end up in terms of, when it final registers, because obviously people continue to register through May and June and July and sometimes in August. But we will have a decision, as we do every year, about what our kindergarten enrollment is and how many sections we will put in kindergarten. The other option, obviously, if we decide we need to, is online teachers, which is on the next slide. The survey results do indicate at every single level, students will continue to remain online of varying numbers. So our survey results indicate that we will need online teachers into 21-22, specific at the elementary level. And that one of those teachers could potentially be hired to be an online teacher. That would prevent those students, us having to pay the students to be in the digital academy, because although the digital academy is an in-house run program, it is not free. We pay a provider to teach those students, or we pay one of our teachers to teach those students. MTSS, as you heard earlier, I won't go through this. There are 6 positions. We would redistribute them for reading support at Weisenberg K3, 1 for reading and math support at Northwestern Elementary, and 4-5. Special education, Mrs. Edmonds mentioned earlier, we currently have 8 positions of special education teachers at the elementary, 7 learning support, that's what LS means, 1 emotional support. This would allow us to provide emotional support services in both buildings. One thing about the equity, and I will reference something Dr. Novik said at the beginning, equity is providing every student what it is that they need in terms of resources and supports. We can't provide emotional support services to students at Weisenberg. The program doesn't exist there. And so you can only provide programs to students when the services exist in the building. And so our plan would be to redistribute those 8 teachers in special education, all highly qualified in special education, to 4 at Weisenberg and 4 at Northwestern. Mrs. Edmonds, Mrs. Burlett, and Mrs. Pulley have already gone through the needs of students in terms of their disability and needs and support of instructional assistance. And we can provide emotional support in both buildings with this model. It will allow us in special education, and Mrs. Edmonds briefly mentioned this, to support students in 1 or 2 grade levels versus 3. And so when you have 3 special education teachers supporting 6 grade levels, the minimum amount of grade levels they're supporting are 2. And so when you are now able to group a content area expert in that area to be able to support the special education students, that is why Mrs. Edmonds spoke in detail about the least restrictive environment and providing that opportunity for our students to be with their grade level peers in a supported way in the regular classroom. Gifted support, we currently have a 40% gifted position. That would remain the same to support our gifted students. They would be grouped differently. Obviously, I mentioned in a previous board meeting, we might have one student that is in our accelerated studies, might either be gifted or might just be very talented in a particular area. And that person might or might not have a group in that particular grade level, because the other 2 students that would be grouped with that student go to Northwestern Elementary in a different building. And so that would allow us to group those students instead of multiple grade levels with students of the same grade level. We'll have to, through this plan, look through office support and support staff and be able to distribute those. We have not done any plans in terms of that to distribute this office and support staff. And our EL staff position is 100% and would stay 100%. This would allow us to not replace the two teachers, and yet not affect any programs or class sizes, and using our existing staff to do this, as well as the programs in terms of clubs and options with our existing staff without additional cost to do so. I tried to put together an executive summary. Please understand this is not an exhaustive list, but knowing that this presentation was going to be long and we had things on various screens presented by various different people, we certainly put together some of the advantages in terms of an executive summary. The enhancements to programs for all K-5 students, you heard Mrs. Burlett and Mrs. Pulley talk about doubling the amount of MTSS reading support for our students. We would also be able to add math intervention in 4-5, which does not currently exist. We would add emotional support and English language services in both buildings, neither of which currently exist at Weisenberg Elementary School. Improve consistency with the delivery of curriculum and instruction. We create opportunities for all K-5 students, and the addition of band and chorus in 4th grade, which is currently offered in 5th, as well as the clubs in 4th and 5th, and the scheduled maker space to support STEAM in K-3. Would achieve our special education and socioeconomic balance, as well as maximize the capacity in both of our buildings. And as Dr. Sosnowick mentioned at the very beginning, providing the flexibility to balance the class sizes as our population fluctuates using our existing staff. One of the important things for you to remember is 70% of our budget is staffing. And when we can more equitably distribute our staff and personnel costs, it has advantages for student outcomes as well as finances. And so when you're going through your evaluation of this proposal, it has to, and I keep using the words, check multiple boxes. It has to be good for kids. It has to be good for teachers. It has to be good financially. You have to consider all of those things in terms of your decision making. And again, this is not an exhaustive process, but you're talking about the distribution of staff, which is 70% of our budget. Summary of challenges. Obviously, there's an impact to families as well as community involvement. We heard that loud and clear on the survey that we did last year in terms of the decision having an impact to our families, as well as potentially their involvement at school. The additional transition for students, which we talked at length, is seen by some as a disadvantage, is seen as some by an advantage. There's two sides of that coin. And also recognizing that there's several groups of students in this process that will transition more than once. And I will use our current 2nd grade students at Northwestern Elementary. They will transition to Weisenberg for 1 year and will transition back. Our 4th grade at Weisenberg is in the same situation where they will transition to Northwestern Elementary for 5th grade, and then we'll transition to the middle school the following year. So just recognize there are multiple grade levels of students that will transition more than once. Increased ride time for students on the bus. We've talked about that, but there are students that will ride the bus longer than they currently do. And there's an additional cost for that transportation.
Can I interrupt for a second?
Sure.
So there's just one thing I want to bring up to add to this. Am I not talking?
Yep, there you go.
Okay, sorry. Well, first of all, thank you for talking to other school districts to find out how it's going for them. However, when they made that decision, they weren't faced with the year that we've had. So just to add to the summary of challenges, because as we heard from so many parents that send letters, this has not been an easy year, especially for parents of young children. So we have to let them know that, number one, we hear them. And number two, they need to be part of this decision, maybe in different ways than has previously been done, because these are unprecedented times. And I don't know exactly what that will look like, whether it's a focus group or, I mean, it also depends on which way the board goes and what decisions are made, but we have to acknowledge that, the magnitude of that, and how that is part of the challenges, the time of the year and how it's affected parents with young children.
I absolutely agree. This year has been unprecedented for families. It's been unprecedented for children, unprecedented for teachers. Not sure what next year will look like. We've talked around this table a great deal about trying to prepare for a plan A, B, and Q, about what next year will look like in terms of any potential continued challenges. And a great deal of the information from parents is After this year, it will be incredibly challenging to face another transition. And you are correct. Thank you for pointing that out. Last slide, certainly, as I stated in my final letter in January 2020, it is my strong belief that there are educational benefits, as we've discussed in prior meetings last year, currently this year, that can't be ignored. Educationally, it does provide the best, most equitable opportunity for our children in K-5 and future Tigers. We also, as I mentioned, have to weigh that with our financial constraints, our enrollment trends, our building capacities, our class sizes, our grade span research, the impact of transitions, transportation concerns, length of bus ride, familial or sibling impacts, as well as other important factors as we continue this process. After careful consideration of all the information available from all of the sources, this administration believes that moving to a K-3, 4, 5 model will strengthen our learning community by providing equitable and enhanced educational opportunities and resources for all learners, and recommend that the board of directors approve that reconfiguration of our elementary schools as stated. The board certainly can ask any questions, any additional information you need. It would be our anticipated timeline that you would make a decision on April 21st, which is our regularly scheduled board meeting. No decisions will be made tonight. But certainly any questions, any additional information, any additional feedback you need, data, we are ready and prepared to provide what you need to make your decision. That's our job.
So if I might, I'd like to add two more things that have been on my mind just for consideration as we weigh this decision. You presented the educational issue. You've said oftentimes that it's your job to present to this board the best recommendations you can make about the education of our students. Certainly as a board, we have a responsibility to be equally concerned with it. We also represent this community. And based on many emails that I have read from parents, there is legitimate concern about the parents in this community about the effects on their families and their ability to support this. And I think as a board, we have to make sure that we are being very conscious that they're part of this equation, and they've made their feelings very clear in large numbers. To receive the number of emails we have had from parents, the school district, on this issue, I'm counting at least 30 that I have read so far in documents. And it says something about where the community is and their ability to maintain the close level of support that they can play. I think we need to keep that in our mind. Number one. Number two, I think it's an important principle in our personal and professional lives in terms of being effective is to keep in mind the principle first things first. To me, the first thing that this board needs to be worried about right now in this administration is renormalizing education for kids in the school district. Dr. Signovis referenced the Morning Call news article over the weekend that talked about failure rates, and Northwestern certainly looked very good at it. But we don't know what our kids have lost. And clearly, I think you may be talking about this later, but there has to be a plan in place to really begin to assess what has been lost and what will need to happen in order to bring it all back. I think there's no question. We hear a great deal about the social emotional impact that has happened to our kids. What is that going to mean for our teachers next year? What does all of that mean? And to me, it is the number one priority of the school district is to renormalize the educational experience for our kids. I think it's going to be a huge challenge next year. I think that's going to demand a great deal of time and effort on the part of our teachers. And again, having overseen 2 reorganizations of school, I can guarantee you that this level of change is very disruptive for people for at least the first half of the year. There are variables that go into making this kind of a change happen on the ground that some of them are predictable, some of them you don't even see coming, but they take also a great deal of time and energy. So put those two things next to each other. The potential for this type of a change and renormalizing the educational environment for our kids. Just put it out there. I don't know where I'm going with all that, but that's what's been on my mind and what's really troubling me about where are the priorities, what is the level of significance, where are we going to put our energy? And I'm not looking for answers. I'm just putting that out there for people to think about as they evaluate the vote in 2 weeks.
I'd like to just make a real brief comment. First of all, thank you for the presentation, very informative to everyone that participated in it. But I echo some of what Dr. Warfel has to say. We have to really take what the parents are thinking about this. I received a large amount of emails, probably 30. I didn't receive any emails from parents that are actually for it. I would like to hear who is for it and what do our teachers think as a whole. And I also am very concerned on, getting our children back to school should be our #1 priority. And I'm sure the staff agrees with me on that. And also, once we get back, to bring our kids up to speed to where they should be academically. Just a comment.
Any other comments from board members before we move on?
Yeah, Bill, I just have one comment. Acknowledging that this is tough. I mean, this is tough for so many different ways, but I feel very strongly that decisions need to be made for the best recommendations of educational experiences for kids. And if we are trusting the administrators, the entire administrative team, not just Jen and Troy, but the principals and the teachers and everyone who's going to support this, if they're committed to making this transition, if it happens, to be the best possible experience for students, I think as a board, we need to consider supporting that as them being the professionals who have the best interest of our kids in mind, and not doing anything and sitting back and saying, well, if we don't do this, then parents need to be happy with larger class sizes or inequities of services. I think that that's a misstep. And, when we talk so much about equity in today's world across so many different subjects, education is not blind to this. So while I know this is going to be a difficult situation, it's going to disrupt the community if we do or don't do this, we're here to do what's best for kids for their educational experiences. And I feel pretty strongly about that.
Thank you, Rachel. Are there any other comments or suggestions before we move on? Or any, as Mrs. Holman asked, if there are any other information or any other data that people would like to see before we get together again in 2 weeks. And I know, John, you asked for emails from people who support this. I'm not sure if we are going to be able to get that to you. Usually when something like this comes before us for a decision, we hear the negatives, not very many positives, because people are putting their trust in the decision-making of the people making the decisions. I don't know if we'll be able to do that for you, John, to get you a bunch of emails that support it. But is there any other data or any other information that anyone would like to see before we meet again in 2 weeks? I think we brought some good points into the discussion this evening with Dr. Warfel's comments and with Todd Weiser's comments about the discussion we had this evening. We have a decision to make that is either going to stay with the status quo or make what I feel to be a permanent change, a permanent solution to this boundary line adjustment that we've been living with for decades in this community, probably since Weissenberg was built. We can put it off and put it off, and may make the people who are unhappy now happy because it doesn't affect their kids. But there will be families in the community coming in after them with children going through the same age groups who will be affected. And they will be unhappy if it ever comes to pass. Or we will just stay in this rut that we're in, and every several years draw a new boundary line that separates the north from the south in our district, and continues to have this problem that we have in trying to balance the enrollment in the schools. So it's a big decision we have to make, and there are a lot of things that we have to consider. It's not just reconfiguration, it's not just inconveniencing some families. This is a permanent solution that will help us, I believe, financially. It will help us with equity in our education. And I think we just have to face it, and we will take a vote in 2 weeks. So let's move to the 2.02.
I will do that, thank you. 2.02 was an add to the agenda because, as you saw in recent newspaper articles, there was a recent announcement of the American Rescue Plan, which was Act of 21, which they are also naming ESSER 3, Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund. Every school district receives dollars, some of which, 20% to be exact, that has to be devoted for learning loss. And so, Dr. Werkel mentioned, I think I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, what we would like your support for, because the turnaround time is quick, is that we do have $262,000 that needs to be devoted to learning loss across this summer, next school year, and the summer after. And so Mrs. Stitzel, myself, the elementary principals, Mr. DeVico at the middle school have been working on a tentative plan that we would like to ask families for summer camps here. They would be, I would say, co-run by our teachers and our support staff, as well as local vendors providing some support. And so our teachers and principals would utilize the data in the buildings to be able to identify students that have experienced learning loss and be able to refer them to a summer program option. We would be looking at a 3 or 4 week program at both the elementary level as well as the middle school level. We would be looking at week-long, all-day programs for children that would have a math component and a ELA component that is specifically research-based designed to make up for learning loss, as well as looking at options from the community with, I'm going to call it a fun component. We thought for particular elementary families, everybody's on the hunt for some of the local camps that are out there, and if we could offer something on-site here provided by that camp, free of charge to families. And just, I'll give you an example for someone like the mad scientist, Lehigh Valley, to come in and do a program. And so the day would look like everyone would come in early in the morning, meet with their teacher, do a morning meeting, work on an ELA lesson that is specifically designed to address the learning loss that student exhibits across whatever anchors or subject standard areas. Then there would be a program that the Mad Scientist or Da Vinci Center or Penn State Lehigh Valley would do on a particular topic like aerodynamics or crazy chemistry, or data detectives. They have a number of different programs we've investigated with a number of different providers would come in. Students would be grouped by grade level, offering it to K through 5 students that are in K through 5 now. At the elementary level, we are anticipating then to be able to offer a math learning loss section with our teachers, as well as some fun outside time because it will be nice out. Same thing at the middle school. We do have some programs. One different with the middle school is we'd like to take advantage of Camp LCTI, which is being offered to students this year. And obviously, if students need transportation to LCTI, we would certainly provide that. But Camp LCTI is being offered, which is a STEAM program that also hits math and reading for our middle school students. And then we would offer on-site programming for the remaining weeks. Parents could certainly based on what the group of students we have would sign up for sessions. It would be free of charge. We would be able to use our summer seamless lunch program to be able to provide lunch to students here. And then obviously, if there is any transportation services, we would employ drivers to be able to transport students. And so we would like to run this program this summer and get some feedback. We already did get some feedback from our staff of who might be interested in working particular weeks. So we knew that we would be able to staff it. We do have some price estimates and information from each of the providers to be able to run the camps on site. As I said, food service through our summer seamless program, as well as transportation, and trying to get this off the ground for this summer to be able to use some of the money in the summer. That I think is one of the intended purposes, obviously hitting some of the students that might have learning loss before they would come back for school. We also have tentative plans to be able to K through 12, look at some kind of tiger tutors, I think is what we're calling it, that might be able to offer tutoring to students after school hours during the school year. And then we anticipate the potential to be able to offer some sort of programming next summer. Might look a little different, but we'll evaluate the kind of providers and programming we're able to offer this year and determine what impact it has. Numbers are up in the air, but certainly right now we're planning for at least 72 elementary students to be able to participate, and if we could certainly increase from there. We have to, I don't want to send something out and get availability if it's an interest from our students, if indeed that's not something that the board would support using those funds for. They do need to be devoted to learning loss, and like I said, it's a 20% set aside that PDE recently announced.
So this is a use it or lose it grant that we can take advantage of, and we feel that we can do some good with it with remedial learning for some of the kids in the district.
It is. It's not something we applied for yet. The grant application is not even open yet. Mrs. Stithel and Mrs. Frisbee are both on it, are certainly more in tune to this than I, but the grant application is not even open yet. But obviously, before we put something out to families saying this is something we might be able to offer to all families, where we would be offering at least 4 weeks of summer programming to kids all day long, want to make sure it's something that you support, because you will ultimately, when the grant application opens, approve that submission to PDE for approval.
What are you looking for this evening?
Just so that you're good with the additional plan, I'll need
Anybody-
approval. You will
anybody
approve it
object?
when the grant comes.
Anybody object to pursuing the summer camp?
I think it's a great idea. Is it by invitation or referral?
You have to target the money with students that are learning, that have been identified with learning loss. So the principals have plans right now to either use data and or teacher referrals into the program. Obviously, if we have slots available, it could be then opened up beyond that. Does that answer your question or not?
Absolutely.
I don't think there's any objection to this.
Our building principals have already done some preliminary work, and we talked a little bit with the staff before we sent the survey out to tell them what this would be, and that we certainly would look at some of the data, but not everything's in the data. And sometimes there are things that teachers recognize that student really struggled with, and they will also be able to have the opportunity to make referrals of students, and then those contacts would be made by teachers to parents to say, this is a program we really think you should consider enrolling your child in for this summer that could really help him or her.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Will you at some time also be discussing recovery plans in terms of assessing student achievement, student loss across the board? What the impact is on the curriculum and where the time and the energy will come from for people to be able to plan those interventions for next year. That's part of what I was referring to before in terms of normalizing school.
Yeah, our building principals and the two that are in the room probably can speak to this best. At the end of last year, we used some of the professional development days at the end of the year for every staff person to go through and look at the content they completed. And in that case, it was March through May, to see what content they covered, what content they didn't cover, what adjustments needed to be made for the next grade level. And obviously exacerbated over the year, it's twofold. It's the content covering, and it's the depth and the retention by which students retain it, because we are covering a good amount of content. I think our teachers K-12 would say, in terms of where they traditionally are. It is measuring the depth and retention of that content in multiple mediums of learning across the year. But yes, some of the learning loss dollars may also be used for staff professional development to redo content in a, I'm gonna call it an interim plan way, because you don't want to change the curriculum, but there might be needing to be adjustments moving from one grade level to another. Do either of you want to add to that? You're welcome to.
That's just what we had them do. So I would imagine we would do something similar this year to support continued progress.
Yeah, they did some of that in March to May, knowing that even though it was a shorter period of time and certainly completely online created a different challenge, they needed to make some intermediary adjustments to curriculum and content as students move forward to the next grade level. And it has a different implication, and I know Aileen is on somewhere too, at the high school in terms of prerequisites for next courses, et cetera, in a different level. But yeah, some of the dollars can be used also for adjustments to curriculum as well. Mrs. Stitzel, you are, oh no, sorry, CLIU plan. Mrs. Frisbee or Mrs. Edmonds, do you want to address that one?
Sure, I can take it, Mrs. Ullman. The first document you see there is the CLIU Facilities Plan Recommendation. It was approved by district contacts across the county on February 3rd, and then the CLIU board on March 3rd. Essentially, the two changes in there is Carbon County is moving a classroom, while the IU is moving a classroom within Carbon County, and then Lehigh County is adding a classroom and then potentially looking to add an additional life skills classroom. It's a routine item, and we typically vote on this yearly.
Okay. Any questions, or we will bring that for your approval? Mrs. Stitzel, curriculum textbooks.
Thank you. So last year, as you may or may not recall, last year around this time, we did bring to you, and you did approve new and revised curriculum documents for our grades 6 through 12 math curriculum. And at that time, the majority of the textbooks for those newly revised curriculum documents were also approved by you. However, there were a few textbooks at the high school level that we actually did not find any that were at that time appropriate and a good match for the curriculum documents that we had revised at the high school. Since that time, however, with the year that we've actually had our teachers take a look again to see if they could find some more appropriate textbooks, and they have. So these textbooks you'll see on the agenda tonight by the text title, the subject that it corresponds with, and the publisher as well. As required, the texts along with the rubric and also the evaluation tool that were used for every single book that was considered, those that were approved and also those that were not approved, they will be on display for the public for a minimum of 30 days. And then I will be asking for your approval to purchase the text at the regular board meeting on May 12th. I posted the information also on our website under the curriculum and instruction tab. And any person who does wish to view the text should do so, should actually contact me directly so that I can schedule a time with them and they can come in and view the text.
Okay. Thank you. Dual enrollment courses, Mrs. Frisbee?
Yes, thank you. This is a routine item. However, we typically look at dual enrollment reimbursement in the fall. This year was a little bit different in that LTRI-C's foundation actually had a grant program that provided reimbursements to students. So working with Mrs. Yadish at the high school, trying to make sure that we were fully utilizing and accessing the foundation dollars at LTRI-C, we held off on this reimbursement for this year. So this is the budgetary dollars that we have that we fund through the budget on an annual basis to reimburse students who are attending dual enrollment courses, whether it be at LTRI-C or another approved college or university that we have agreements with. And so for this year, based off of the number of students and courses, we are seeking $45 reimbursement per course for any student who enrolls in an approved dual enrollment course from the fall of 2020 that was not enrolled in LTRI-C because LTRI-C reimbursed those classes for the fall, or spring of 2021. And so this is, again, routine, and we're just seeking reimbursement. It's a little bit later because of the uniqueness of the LTRI-C's foundation providing new grant funds.
Any questions for Leslie on the action we'll be taking in 2 weeks? Leslie, do we have a cap on this?
So the way that we look at this is we budget $7,500 annually. So working with the high school guidance office and Aileen, we basically back into the reimbursement number. So they take a look at the total courses, and then we back into that reimbursement amount. So just for example, in 1920, the reimbursement per course was $25 a course. In 1819, it was $30 a course. It's more this year because L Tri-C's foundation reimbursed a significant amount of the dual enrollment from the fall semesters. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on when we talk briefly about budget. However, it is something that we are proposing a change moving forward because of the continuation of that grant program through L Tri-C.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, Leslie. Any other questions before we move on? Okay, that wraps up the curriculum and building issues. Moving into policy, is there, Dr. Sisnovic, is there any input that we've received for the second reading?
No, sir.
And there are no first readings, so we'll move. We'll address the second reading in 2 weeks of the policy listed and move into operations.
Thank you, Mr. Delker. Here we have listed, unfortunately, the document is not complete, but it is the approval for Barry Izett. Barry Izett Architects are engineering incorporated, are the engineers that we're going to use for the water line replacement. Jess did just get back to me late today with some changes. So we're working through that process, and we're also working out between who does what between Barry Izett and Alvin Books for us as a project manager. So as soon as I get this document finished, I will have it up here posted for you for board approval next week or 2 weeks.
So you anticipate this will be ready for
approval? Yes.
Okay. Any questions about the water line project?
The only comment I have is, Mr. Oaks mentioned the contract, but this will be like one motion together or two separate, both to approve Barry Izett, to develop the specifications as well as to go out to bid. That was the water line project. That was the water line project, the most recent next phase on the master's facility plan of project. So it will be both April 21st.
That's correct. And I just want to put a caveat in there. If we do run into some timing issues where it cannot be completed within the summer window, we're going to Band-Aid it and wait until next summer. We cannot run the risk of not having a water line in place for the start of school. So if the timing does not work out, you'll see it next year instead.
Very well. Okay. Any questions? Then we'll move into district finances. And Leslie, will you just take us through all of these items? There are a lot of routines in here, so let's just move right through those, please.
Yes, sure. So tonight I just have a very brief budget update to just show some of the progress that we've made working towards the final 21-22 budget. So back in March, we presented updated revenues. So this month, really just doing a refresh and taking a look at some of those district-wide expenditures, some of those other individual line items to see where we can either whittle down or more specifically identify what those costs needs to be moving forward. So at this stage, we have not made any changes to staffing. That's something that we continue to work on, and we'll bring a full staffing proposal incorporated into the budget in the May budget presentation. So tonight, just really want to briefly talk to you about a couple of the line items that we've made changes from what you previously saw back in January. So if you can scroll down just a little bit to the box that is in gray that says major changes since January budget. Just want to briefly talk about these very quickly to show kind of where we're ending up as of March in terms of budgetary shortfall, looking ahead, or excuse me, April, not March, looking ahead to May proposed budget adoption, and really where we're working towards for a final budget adoption in June, and kind of how the pieces are going to start to come together. So preliminarily built into the budget, we had a healthcare renewal for medical prescription and medical and prescription of about 10%. We have the final renewal in, which is a combined percentage increase of 965. So without making specific changes to individual staffing, that automatically allows us to reduce the healthcare budget by a little over $16,000. When we take a look at our in-house digital academy program, we had increased dollars associated with the budget previously. As we look towards 2021, after really looking at those costs and identifying some students we believe it's appropriate based off the amount of federal grant funds that we are slated to receive, that we feel like we can bring that in and restore that line item through this normal budgetary process back to, I'll call it kind of a pre-COVID line item. And then any offsetting increased costs associated with Digital Academy and online students would be funded through potential grant funds, that federal funding. The bad news at this point is our cyber charter tuition payments. We're looking like we do need to increase that line item. When we take a look at, we look at the actual enrollments and try to make some projections moving forward. Our January budget numbers had enrollments based off of October data. At this point, when we've kind of refreshed those enrollment numbers moving into March and to April, we have seen an increased enrollment in cyber charter students. Therefore, we at this time are recommending an increase about $250,000 to that line item. So in totality, that line item will increase by about $700,000 for the 21-22 school year compared to where we sit currently in 2021. Certainly that is a significant line item that we continue to watch, continue to try to pinpoint. So right now what we have built into the budget for 21-22 is actual enrollment based off of 21-22 March, as well as some additional students, or I'll call them slots for potential students who would leave as we move into next school year, and certainly the uncertainty with everything with COVID. Dual enrollment reimbursement, I talked a little bit about this up above when we did the reimbursement. At this point in time, because L-Tri-C's program seems to be becoming more robust and they anticipate that to continue into next fall and next spring, it would be our recommendation to eliminate our in-house dual enrollment reimbursement program. It's not significant amount of dollars, but it is something that we see L-Tri-C has come and really replaced a lot of that funding that we were previously trying to reimburse to families. Safety and security, we're increasing by about $50,000. Previously, this was an item down in included in our strategic fund line item. We continue to year after year look at our safety and security plan. So whether that be replacing cameras, implementing a district-wide camera program, building security, whether it be ID scanners or lock systems, or replacing keys, things like that, we feel that we have recurring costs associated with that, and felt it was appropriate to really dedicate a line item within the budget for safety and security moving forward. Fund transfers, we have an additional $50,000 there. When we just take a look at things like the refi savings and capital reserve transfers, additional technology needs, what we have planned transfers, and other things that are really one time that we don't want to build into other areas of the budget, but really want to account for because we anticipate that spending next year. And then certainly federal grants, which we talked about last month. This is really a budgetary neutral item. We've increased the revenue side by $429,000 to accommodate some of those grants. As we move into May, you'll see that number increase even more, as now we have our ESSER 3 allocation. So we'll build that in. But again, at this point, it's really budgetary neutral. So we're increasing the revenue, increasing the exact same amount on the expenditure side, because it is one-time funding. So we don't want to supplant those funds and create a significant budget shortfall in subsequent fiscal years. So in totality, we are anticipating actually an increase compared to what we were looking at back in January, about $698,000. But again, $430 of it relates to the federal grant, which has an offsetting revenue increase as well. So if you look in totality, kind of where we're at with the revised budget shortfall, you look over in that first black shaded box on the top there. When we look at flowing these changes through, our estimated budget shortfall before any tax increase would be 4.7 or 3.4, almost $3.5 million. We've talked about our Act 1 increase, the ability to increase taxes by 3%, which would generate about $855,000, brings that shortfall down to 2.6 million. Through our plans, and also attached to tonight's agenda is kind of a tentative spending plan of use of fund balance. We always identify, plan one-time expenditures that we believe are appropriate uses of our fund balance to help balance the budget. We've identified about $1.6 million of those, with a remaining shortfall of about $948,000. And so as we talked last month, how do we make up the gap? How do we bridge that shortfall? Through a combination of targeted cuts, through increased revenues. We're going to creatively and try to utilize that federal funding as best we can. And if there are areas that we can reduce the, I'll call it millage funded impact of the expenditure and fund that with grant funds, knowing that that's a one-time expenditure, that's something that we'll certainly look to do. And again, finalizing some of our staffing plans, truing up healthcare benefits, all of those things, and the combination of those things is what will get us to that balanced budget as we get to May and to June. We as we talk about it, as we look at some of the restoration of revenues, I'm hopeful of increased revenue as we move into the upcoming year. Certainly we recognize, what does the budget look like if we would not raise to the max millage increase? We believe creating sustainable revenues and building that assessment base and that tax revenue is really important for the long-term impact of the district's fiscal health. However, recognizing the current situation with the pandemic, realizing the infusion of some federal dollars. And so we've started to talk about, what does an alternative option look like for not quite a full millage increase? And so really the math is simple as it flows through. Any reduction to the proposed millage increase obviously then would add to the remaining shortfall at the bottom. So the alternative option in box 2 there really just shows if we would increase the index not by 3%, by but a little over 2 to generate about $650,000. The remaining shortfall that we need to look to address between now and May would be about $1.1 million. So we will continue to work through the budgetary process, again, maximizing the grant dollars, maximizing the federal funding, to bring you a balanced budget in the May timeframe. Once we have a better idea of our final staffing plans and moving into what we anticipate next school year. And I'm not going to review the second sheet. That's really just our proposed use of fund balance of what would make up the proposed $1.6 million. Unless there's specific questions, I certainly can address that, but this is something that you've seen before, and just trying to give you some detailed information as to, what would we spend out of fund balance on some one-time things or contingency planning to balance the budget for next year. And so unless there's any questions on the budget, that's really all I have, just a brief update for tonight.
Thank you, Leslie. Any questions? You still got a way to go yet, but any questions from the board about where we stand and timing, potential savings? Just keep pressing on. Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you. I'm actually going to hand over the next several items to Mrs. Edmonds to talk about. These are routine items.
Thanks, Leslie. So yeah, 5.02 is a routine item. This is the CLIU Intergovernmental Agreement for Special Ed Services. In a quick summary, it's the agreement with the CLIU outlining procedural details with relation to special ed services that are provided to our students through the IU. And this just outlines a lot of the details for the different special ed programs that we contract with them for. 5.03 is the CLIU notice of adoption of policies, procedures, and use of funds. This again is a routine item, and this document essentially is Mrs. Holman's signature, indicates we're following all IU adopted policies and procedures, along with all of Chapter 14 and IDEA requirements. And 5.04 is the CLIU TransPerfect Agreement. This is a contract that we utilize for consortium pricing when we need translation services for related IDEA documents. TransPerfect specializes in those IDEA documents, and so allowing us for consortium pricing helps us out with some of those extraordinary costs for translation services.
Okay, these are all routine items that we need to deal with CLIU and action on them in 2 weeks.
Yep. I'll take 505, the LCTI National School Lunch Program. This is a routine item. We do have the food service agreement so that our students have access to the National School Lunch Program down at LCTI. So again, routine, the board has seen this on an annual basis. 506 is the L-Tri-C Dual Enrollment Agreement. This is the agreement with L-Tri-C for for us to allow students to access their dual enrollment courses. So again, this is a routine agreement that you see periodically come before the board. We've seen it other times for different colleges or universities. This particular one pertains to L-Tri-C.
Okay.
The Power School Agreement, this is approval of the Power School Agreement for the term for July 1st through June 30th for next school year in the amount of $10,609. So this is for applications that are used as part of the HR applicant tracking process and evaluation system. Previously, there was another vendor had owned these software applications. Power School has now bought out that vendor, and so now we are required to sign a new master agreement with them as part of the renewal process. So right now, this is pending negotiation of the contract terms. I have communicated with the company as late as today. They are working through legal, and so if we don't get some of those recommendations to the contract language changed by the 21st, we'll hold this item then until May for board approval. But as you can see, we're working ahead, and so we have some time before it would go into effect on July 1st.
Hey, any questions about the Power School Agreement?
Just to be clear, for a minute there, I thought that we were changing the student data system. No. Okay.
Yeah, I think the Power School umbrella seems to encompass a lot of things nowadays. Power School keeps buying up all these other software programs. So for this particular item, it is related to our HR applications.
Okay. I mean, it would be good to do it, but not now.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know what I did neglect to say, compared to what our pricing is for this year, it is about a 5% increase. We have seen typically that increase with this particular software over the past several years. So it's pretty routine at this point. Okay. Moving on to reports, just a brief, if you open the recap, pretty routine month. We continue to see strong collections coming in for delinquent real estate tax collections. Recognize we received contributions from the foundation during this month. And then in terms of state funding and federal funding, you can see we're receiving our scheduled payments. Our collections seem to be strong as we continue to get closer to June. In terms of EIT, we are officially ahead of where we were in collections last year, which is very positive and reassuring. We were anticipating over a 10% loss. So to be, close to level, a little bit higher than we saw in previous collection year is really a positive sign and good for obviously the overall budget, the overall economy, and our taxpayers. On the expenditure side, pretty routine, nothing out of the ordinary. As we start to get into now the next couple months, we'll really start looking at where we believe we're going to end the year in a budget to actual standpoint. So we do know, we have recognized some areas that we're trying to pinpoint and trend out to see where we think we'll have some budgetary variances at the end of this year. At this point, I think, a lot of those things are one time. We're certainly going to address that, see if there's trending, if there's any adjustments that we can make as we move into next school year. But hopeful that we end the year in a positive position. And at this point, that's what I'm anticipating. But certainly more to come on that as we get closer to the end of the year.
Okay, thank you, Leslie. Anybody have any questions for Leslie before we move on? Hearing none, let's move in. Thank you, Leslie. Let's move into old business. Any old business from members of the board? Under new business, we have the L-Tri-C ballot that is either in front of you or will be emailed to you. Each board member has to use the ballot to make their choice for the trustee at large. And I did mine tonight. I think there were five candidates that have been nominated, among which is our own Rachel Scheffler. So take your ballot and place your vote and get it back in here to Stacy, and we will move that on to L-Tri-C.
Just one note for board members, it is at your seat, but the descriptions of each of the candidates is in admin content if you want to read descriptions about each of them. The other items are in public content, and if you are not here tonight, Stacy, Mrs. Eisenhardt will send it to you and have it completed. But it is an individual completion by each board member to complete and return.
Okay, thank you. And once again, we will offer courtesy to, before we do this, is there any other new business from any board member that they'd like to bring up this evening before we move on? Seeing none, at this time, we will also offer a courtesy of floor to, once again, to anybody who would like to address the board. We do have a few.
Patricia Lozano and Ronald Agee.
Mrs. Lozano.
Mrs. Lozano and Mr. Agee. I'll come back to them then. Dr. Lauren Hunsinger.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Okay, just wanted to make sure. I just wanted to start out and say that I appreciate all of the time and effort that went into the presentation tonight. I know that it did take a lot of research, and I do appreciate that. I also do appreciate, as a parent, the benefits that were listed. However, I'd like to just take a couple minutes to discuss what I feel needs more attention that wasn't in the actual presentation. So one of the things I feel that is lacking is the impact of charter schools to possibly voting and implementing reconfiguration. When I served on the parent advisory committee, one of the research that I found was that when you condense schools, or when you change the configurations that make bus rides longer or make students have to travel, further to go to school, or parents have to, get their kids to and from, it can leave a negative impact, not just on families, but it pushes them to look for alternative education structures. And one of the things that I worry about is that parents have already said that if this is implemented, they will leave, they will take their kids. And once they are gone, it's very hard to get them back. And, at the tune of 15,000 or 23,000, depending on education, that's a lot of money that our district will potentially have to pay. And therefore we will lose for our children that are currently staying here. So that's just something that I don't think was talked about. It was a question on the survey, but I do feel that that's something that needs to be looked at further. Another thing that I wanted to point out is that you have a large percentage of maybes from that last survey. However, that last survey was based upon a survey that was sent out regarding education options for next year. It wasn't a specific survey to parents discussing this reconfiguration. And I feel that when parents were answering that, they may not have answered appropriately. I don't think that it's necessarily a true gauge of where we are. And I feel like there really should be a survey asking these questions. Another thing is that I feel like the slides didn't focus on long-term consequences. So what does the capacity issues look like in 5 to 10 years? Will this flip a problem? Could we end up, doing this and then having capacity issues at Weisenberg? Another thing that it was talked about was what we would be differentiating for our students, which in theory is great. I support that. However, what will that actually look like? Will we be differentiating math? Will we continue to differentiate reading? The specifics are lacking, and I feel like those are very important things that as a parent, I would like to know. Another thing is, what will the accountability be to ensure that all the things that are being said in this presentation that will actually be focused on? So, it's great that we're hearing all of this, but how is it going to be implemented, and how will that be assessed, and how will we be holding, our district accountable for this move? One of the things, I obviously live with a history buff. So throughout the history of the United States, whenever there's been a conflict, the most successful resolutions have resulted in compromise, leaving each side feeling like they've gained something. Through compromise comes progress. Isn't that what we really want to accomplish? Don't we want to bridge the gap between the parents, the board, and our school administration? I would really hope that you could consider alternatives. However, if you vote to implement the proposed changes, please think about the impact to current students and consider possibly doing a phased-in approach. Again, I don't necessarily agree with this, but if you are going to vote yes, consider phasing it in. That was previously described back in 2019, and I feel that this would reduce the impact to current students and offer families the option to move older siblings to Weisenberg if they so chose to do it, and to lessen transitions in the burden to families. Again, I do hope that you would consider a less permanent solution, or at least phase it in so that you can look at the opportunity to work out the logistics and challenges, and by doing it over, I believe it was a 4 to 5 year period. I have faith in you that you will ultimately keep our children's best interest in mind, and I do thank you for your service. And I do know that several parents have sent you a presentation that was put together based upon comments and data that was shared amongst other parents on a parent advisory Facebook page. So if you haven't read that, I do encourage you to read it. There was a lot of thought and consideration put into that. So thank you so much for your time. Have a good night.
Thank you, Dr. Hunsiger, for your opinions. I know there were a lot of questions you asked her that we will not address this evening, but the board members have heard what you said and will consider that in making their decision. Dr. Sosnovic, any other people? 3 more?
Mrs. Forwalt.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, so this is Wendy Fornwalt. I'm at 2377 Hefner Road. I'd like to make a couple points. One example of how this reconfiguration will negatively impact our family. I have both a child in elementary school, and I have 2 children who will both be in high school next year. One of them's in middle school and one in high school now. With reconfiguration, my youngest will be at Northwestern Elementary, and we live at the Weisenberg end of the district, about 20 minutes from Northwestern, and only about 3 minutes from Weisenberg. I know my high school students will have after-school activities that will require pickup at approximately 5 p.m. So with this, having my youngest at Northwestern Elementary with a 60-minute bus ride, my choices are to either let her ride the bus home and turn her around and put her right back in the car to pick up her siblings. And from a March 2nd email response to me from the district, I was told that the routes are not that different than our current middle school and high school runs that circulate the district and drop off our main campus. So normally we have about a 60-minute run, sometimes more, rarely less. So that's clearly a poor option to have her ride home and then have to take her right back. I either have to pick her up then during pickup time and sit up there until 5 o'clock, or I have to pick her up at 3:40, drive home and turn around and go back to the school for 5 o'clock, or leave her home alone so I can pick up the kids. None of these are a good option when we live 3 minutes from Weisenberg. It will have a big effect on her, especially if she also has a 60-minute ride to school, leaving at 8:15 in the morning and getting home after 5 o'clock at night. So it's not just people with all elementary students in their family, it's people with older students also who have negative impacts of this. I would also like to make a second point. I'm going to reiterate it from an email I sent last night. It's regarding our current 4th grade students who attend Weisenberg Elementary. Like all students in the district, this particular group of students endured the abrupt school closing, immense change, and abnormal end of the 2019-2020 school year in which they were in 3rd grade. This school year, their 4th grade year, has brought with it quite a bit of additional change, and as we all know, the school year has not been normal. An elementary reconfiguration will require this particular group of students to move from Weisenberg to Northwestern Elementary for their 5th grade school year in 2021-2022, introducing yet another significant change in their lives. Now, after periods of great change in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade, this particular group is still not done. In 2022-2023 school year, they will then have to move to the middle school for 6th grade. So what I just described is over 3 school years of continuous change for this group. I'm also going to acknowledge a similar situation for the current Northwestern Elementary 2nd grade class. The only difference is when they change schools in 2022 and 2023, they will be going back to a school and some teachers they already know, unlike our current 4th graders who will be moving to another school with teachers they don't know and all the new challenges that middle school brings. So at what point do we decide enough is enough for this group of students? It's our responsibility as adults to ensure their well-being. There's very little we can control about COVID. However, reconfiguration timing can be controlled. Please allow these students and their parents a year to recover before forcing more change on them. I recognize there is belief that reconfiguration is necessary for many reasons, but can we please consider getting back to a year more normal in 2021 and 22 with current K-5 reconfiguration and revisit reconfiguration for the 2022 and 23 school year? Or, as Mrs. Hunsaker just suggested, consider phasing in to try and limit this immense amount of change this grade level is experiencing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Swallow, for your comments and suggestions.
Joel Schmoyer, please.
Hi, this is actually Jenny Schmoyer. I'm using my husband's laptop tonight. First, I would like to thank all of you who have worked so hard on gathering information and those of you who have been asking questions in order to make the best decisions for our students. I'm not surprised by the morning call article brought up earlier. However, I believe that article focused on middle school and high school students, and I would argue that elementary students had minimal impact this year, especially in the area of reading. So when talking about the educational benefits, what was concerning to me was the MTSS program's reallocation of the reading teachers. It's a great idea to have a math interventionist. I'm not denying, need for that or anything like that. But what concerns me is that it was stated that grades K-3 would get double the support there, when in actuality, currently grade levels K-3 in Weisenberg and Northwestern have 3 teachers in one building and 3 reading teachers in another building, allowing for 6 grouping options, where now K-3 will only receive 4 grouping options for moving to the 4 reading teachers in those grade levels. And that's concerning to me when looking at the graphs, from Acadians that were shared for kindergarten, benchmarking, and as well as the 1st grade scatter plot. It's really important when talking about MTSS to think about the percentage of students that are at tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. And PDE does recommend, having 80% of students in the tier 1 category. When looking at the scatter plot, it kind of shows, it does show that about 30% in school number 1 and school number 2 are below benchmark as of this January. So that would kind of give the idea that there are less than 80% students in our tier 1 currently. And of course, I understand that every school district has different ways of formulating that. So I don't have that number. But what concerns me is the amount of students below benchmark and us changing from 6 reading teachers currently servicing our students learning to read in K-3 to 4, especially with those, that data that was shared. So those were my biggest concerns. I just, there's been some comments about doing what's best for students. And I just really urge everybody to take a look at that. And there were a lot of great things presented, for our students, makerspace and all those types of things. But in this time, as many other parents have stated, I think a lot of us are going back to the basics, and reading instruction is the basic. It's the core. It's what's important. Patan, they recommend that if you have less than 80% of your students in tier 1, that you look at your core curriculum. So I am curious about, specifically what resources would you be looking at, and how would you use that with small groups, and would that improve the reading instruction? So like I said, I appreciate everybody's time, and thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Schmoyer.
We're going to try Mr. Agee one more time there. So, give it a shot. And it's saying he has an older version of Zoom. So let me see if I can go into a panelist quickly. Mr. Agee, you should be able to unmute.
Hello? I don't know if you guys can hear me. I can't hear anything. But if you can hear me, what I would like to say is my husband and I are brand new to this community. We just moved here last May. My husband is in the Army and I am a stay-at-home mom. My husband is active duty. We live at 2103 Hefner Road. And we have lived in a few different school districts, and we have seen how some things do work and how some things don't work. And one of the things that was extremely concerning to me from the presentation was that for some reason, the schools can't have a before and after school drop off or pick up, which was strange to me. Why that would even be an issue, whether we combine the schools or not. The need for it is still there regardless. And the Parkland School District has it, with YMCA contracted out. They use the cafeteria and they use the playground as their means to do it. Why we can't do it currently, I don't know. If it still has the same capacity that is being used either way currently, then we should be able to have a before and after pickup drop off. Now, my other concern was a lot of this data that is being given out was, done during a non-COVID time. Realistically, COVID isn't going away anytime soon. And the impact that it is doing to this community and all the communities is a huge one. So with the budgets for the bus, is the budget taking into consideration the space to put the students apart? Is it taking into consideration, the lesser capacity to keep students safer? Some parents are getting vaccinations, some parents aren't. We don't know what the impact of this will have next year or the following year. The other thing, because of COVID, we are having a baby boom. And with that baby boom, we are going to have a lot of kindergartners in 5 years, a lot of, third graders in 8 years. Will the capacity of what we are doing currently be as big of an impact then as is now? If we change it to this reconfiguration, how much of an impact will that have then? Will we need more resources? So with all of these things in mind, and it can make it a huge burden on families. The last thing I wanted to bring up is low-income families. I was looking at the numbers for at least Weisenberg Township. I'm still new, like I said. I don't know how big Weisenberg is, but there is a small amount of low-income families. But there is a large amount of blue-collar families compared to white-collar families. And the financial impact and the stress that this can have on families, we are still considered low income because we're military, and my husband is not he's an officer, and we are still considered low income. And, you know, for us, we are able to kind of maneuver things, but not everybody is, and not everybody has the chance to do it. We're also a minority. So the impact that that can have, and the impact that it has on the, you know, people who are learning, or the children that are learning English, it's a huge thing. It's a huge thing for these families, and it can hurt them financially. And the stress that happens in a home also can happen to children. I know that in Weisenberg, we have spoken to the principal and, you know, and his teacher, and I know that, you know, if from our moving, it has impacted our child. And, you know, when my husband is away, it impacts him. So whether we have a happy time or a, you know, stressful time, that stuff makes a huge difference for our child. And when we can't make it for something for our son currently, it, you know, it holds a big thing for him. If we start splitting up the school and parents having to go from one school to the other school, or not being able to, you know, handle all that stuff, that alone will impact, and it will make the biggest impact for these children compared to anything else. Yes, we can have great academics, but if children are stressed out because of their home, it will diminish any good work that will happen. I will end this because I don't know where to end it, but I'm hoping that you guys will take this into consideration and, you know, do everything you guys can for the families and the students, because it's, yes, we want the students to have great education, but with education, it's also family, and families are a huge part of that. So thank you very much. Have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments and for attending this evening. Is there anyone else? Anyone else? Okay, well, thank you all for attending and for spending the last 3.5 hours with us to try to work through this situation. And at this time, we are going to end the workshop meeting, and we will move into an executive session with the board to discuss personnel matters. And that I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion by Mr. Rex, second by Mrs. Lister. Meeting adjourned.